John, this is Scott Walter.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
Well, not that great. I just came from the site, and the government won't let me in. It's bullshit. Dying to see this video here.
I'm glad to show it to you.
Yeah, I'd say, I got to tell you, the government wouldn't let me in. How the hell did you get in and take these videos?
Well, I had a permit back in 2011. I tell you, if you want to know more about this, and this is how I found out about the site, you need to contact Richard Thornton. He's a Native American architect down in Georgia, and he's spent, a decade studying this.
Does he think there could be a Maya-Georgia connection at this site?
Yeah, and that's what caught my attention.
Walter.
Richard Thornton, glad to meet you.
Yeah, I was visiting down at Chattahoochee National Forest.
Yes.
Tried to look at some mound structures. I'm investigating a possible connection between the Mayans and Georgia. And tried to go look at these mounds, and I was denied.
You're kidding.
No, I was denied. First of all, I take it you support this whole Mayan-Georgia connection?
Well, it's not even a theory, it's a fact. The Mayas are one of the Mexican Native American ethnic groups that became the Creek Indians.
What are some of the things that to you provide evidence of this assimilation, really, or this coming together here in Georgia from Mexico?
We have the architecture, we have the cultural traditions, the art are very similar.
Okay.
Approximately a third to a half of the words in the Itzati Creek language are either Maya or Totonac.
Okay, linguistics.
Linguistics.
If you're able to make a definitive connection, it will prove to me beyond a shadow of a doubt that we definitely have this connection between the Mayans in Mexico and Georgia.
It actually matches almost perfectly.
So we have a match, don't we?
Yes, we do.
You know what? I'm surprised, but yet I'm not surprised. Given everything that I've seen, this was the final piece to tie this together. At the start of a new Baktun, a new beginning. A new beginning might have been what the Mayans were looking for in Georgia.
Quite surprised to see you use the word Aborigines talking about African Americans. Quite surprised to see you use the word Aborigines talking about African Americans. Quite surprised to see you use the word Aborigines talking about African Americans.
Yeah, I mean, Olmec means rubber people, right? Otherwise, the Olmec, it is a civilization, it's a group of people that suddenly disappear. The Olmec, it is a civilization, it's a group of people that suddenly disappear, right? And I guess the biggest mystery goes about those treasures left behind. And I guess you know those, right?
Yes.
Seen those. I guess you know, we're talking about the Olmec heads, right?
Yes.
Those made with the basaltic, rock, right? And I guess you know which is the point. The mystery, it is that those Olmec heads showing us none of the features.
Right.
Can I say that? I'm not offending anyone. Did I offend someone? Not at all. Oh, no, sorry. Just want to say it once. Physical characteristics quite different to the rest of the people we have in this country, right?
Yes.
So, physical characteristics quite different to the rest of the people we have in this country, right?
Yes.
So, I guess you know what I'm talking about? I mean, the Mexican people always believe that the origin of the people in this country it is Asia, right? We say the last ice age, right? 25,000 years ago. The land bridge, Aleutian Islands, and the people going through the
Bering Strait.
Bering Strait, right? It is quite common for us to recognize those physical characteristics with the people in Yucatan and the Oriental Chinese people. Actually, so many people, I mean, one of the nicknames we have for the people around the area, we say Chino, China. I mean, because the almond-shaped eyes, right? See, we say like that. But those Olmecs, it's a kind of, I mean...
Shut your goddamn ass up.
Columbus never once set his foot on the American continent. On his third voyage, on August 7, 1498, 3 of his ships landed in South America. He did not come off the ship. He said he had arthritis. Did not come off the ship. Sent the landing party aboard, and a few days later, when he got into the Caribbean, he reported back on a mailboat to Spain that South America was an island, just as the landmass he had struck was an island, and just as he had reported earlier that Cuba was the continent. Just as he reported earlier that he was in India. Just as he reported earlier that the people were being called Caribs, when in fact Carib comes from Caraib, which means foreigner. They were calling the Spanish Caraib. Just as he reported earlier that the people were being called Caribs, when in fact Carib comes from Caraib, which means foreigner. They were calling the Spanish Caraib. These clowns, who knew nothing about linguistics or geography, or had no advanced science, stumbled into the Caribbean looking for gold, thinking they were in Asia. Columbus never saw the complexity of the Americans. It was Cortez, the first modern European of that Columbus era, who reported on what he saw in the core and heartland and center of American civilization. And Cortez said, and I quote him, "When I saw their pyramids and their palaces and their temples and their floating gardens, the chinampas, the most advanced agricultural technique then in the world, known only in medieval Ghana and Mexico, and their aqueducts and their reservoirs and their zoos and their running baths," there were very few running baths then in Europe, he said, "I have not seen its like anywhere." But what do we know of the American Indian? The edge, the periphery, the savages, the primitives. I grow up, I come to the city, I see movies for the first time. What do I see? I see these strange half-naked savages running about, woo, 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 woo. And there is John Wayne and Ronald Reagan ticking them off from the caravan. Those are the images. And it affects the colonized people throughout the world. Because it's one thing to invade. All people have invaded or been invaded. This is another thing to wipe out the memory of their history until they themselves not only forget, but begin to preach and to propagate the same fictions about themselves that others have propagated. And when new facts emerge, and they're irrefutable, you find not only the Eurocentrics who will contest with you, but even those people who should know better, or at least attempt to know better, because they shouldn't know better, they're part of this civilization, they're part of its falsehood, that should at least attempt to revise their conceptions, they become involved in it.
was to take over the work that was to be done in the Freedmen's Bureau, which was closed in 1870, where you were to be colonized back on your land between the Allegheny and the Rocky Mountains, and you deal with the 1330 parallel issue, et cetera, et cetera. And but of course, you know, with the maintenance of the Negro brands, and then the Asiatics keeping the European family names, that knocked that out the box. And then they killed Lincoln so that the other information couldn't be expended to you, because actually the Emancipation Proclamation dealt with corporations, or the transfer of the slaves from the corporate families to the corporate state. It didn't free you. Don't misunderstand that. It means a transfer. And so our people think that the Emancipation Proclamation was a document of freedom, and there was a document of transfer of responsibility for the cares of the property. No different than if we all get together, you know, because we got the burden of doing business as individual units, and we decide to incorporate, and then we have a corporation that takes care of those affairs. Well, that's what the corporate states have done for the plantations. Are we clear on that? So remember that when you say, you know, state of New Jersey and state of Pennsylvania, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and stuff like that, that you're actually talking about corporations. Never think of them as the land. Are we clear? I know most of you know this, but those who don't, get very clear in your brain and in your mind whenever you start talking about New Jersey.
100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. In exile in his own land. In his own land.
The term redskin is the most derogatory term that you could call Native people. This term is equivalent to nigger. This term has a very violent historical reference to Native people. At a time when the United States government had a bounty on Native American people, you could earn money by killing Indians. The tomahawk was the tool that was used to collect the bounty to scalp Native people, and was in fact issued by the United States government to, for the purpose of scalping Indians so they could collect bounty. And if you brought in the bodies of Indian people, you could collect your bounty. And when it became too cumbersome to bring in the bodies, they would bring in the heads. When it became too cumbersome to bring in the heads, they would bring in the scalps or the red skins of Native people. And that's where this term comes from. This is the image used by Cleveland Indians, and again, I take something that's a direct use by a team and is imposed on a group of people despite their objections. This image should have gone by the wayside along with Little Black Sambo and the Frito Bandito. That this image honors neither Indian or non-Indian people. And that I think anyone who looks at this can recognize it as a blatant racist caricature. And tells you, you know, really, again, our place in the society.
Sure, I love you people. Your blood is the same blood of mine. I don't have nothing against you. I'm not making funny. Hey, baby, you know what? The only fun hey, darling, the dollars is what I'm concerned with. The dollars is what I'm concerned with, darling. I'm not tired. I'm not tired of doing this. It comes down to one simple thing. Dollars, honey. Money, you know it. You know it. I'm not offended. Hey, brother, please, cut the cameras off. Cut the cameras off. Y'all should do the same.
it must be some book. Let me see. Oh, nice. Blood-curdling Indian tales. Oh, you're reading more sophisticated stuff these days. Those were very exciting times. I'm glad I didn't live in them. Listen to this. Then the silhouettes of the Indians appeared on the horizon. The pioneer men pushed the women and children back into the wagons. Imagine being alone out on the prairie, thousands of miles away from any help. Imagine that. The Indians crept closer and closer. Fire-tipped arrows pierced the canvas of the first wagon. Women fainted. Children screamed. The Indians were almost upon them. They could see their fiendish faces hideously painted, grotesque in the light of the leaping flames. There was a lull as the last groans of the dying men faded. Suddenly, to the ears of the cowering women and children, out of the stillness of the night, broke the sound of an Indian war cry.
It's just the doorbell.
Oh, I was really gone.
I'm telling you, these things get
This presentation is an update of the South Carolina interview done in the summer of 2011 entitled African Americans Ain't African. I received almost 60,000 hits and thousands of comments, most of the comments being favorable. The ones that weren't favorable, well, they still help because they help keep us sharp. The drawings and pictures you are about to see should prove without a doubt that the people commonly referred to as African Americans are none other than the Anasazi races of North America. More information can be obtained at AfricanAmericans.org. Enjoy the presentation. Just 70 miles south of Birmingham, Alabama lies Moundville Archaeological Park. Moundville was a major center before European contact. The lifestyle mannequins pictured here are the forebears of the indigenous people who live there to this very day. I contacted the museum and asked how long had these mannequins been part of the exhibit. I was informed that they had been there since the early 70s. In 2010, the museum received a facelift, and now these are the new residents of Moundville. These people are replacing the indigenous people. This is further proof, as many have speculated in the past, that the black Negro American is being Africanized off of his ancestral homeland. So now when you visit the museum, you get this instead of this. Kind of like going from this to that. In his book, Confederate Currency, The Color of Money, the author John Jones showed how the black Negro Americans were used on the money in the southern states. Question: would Europeans drag people from halfway around the world, then put them on their currency? Of course not. They were trying to get the indigenous people to use money because they have never used it before. So adding them on the money made the Amerindians think that they were becoming part of a European economic system, when in reality it was used to steal their earth. It is important to keep in mind that at this time, the Europeans thought that the world was flat. But when they got to the Americas, that notion was immediately discarded. We all know that very bright talents may be lodged under a very dark skin. William Byrd, 1728. William Byrd was a tobacco planter in Virginia. When he talks about dark skin, who is he alluding to? Well, let's take a look. This photo shows how an original work can be transformed throughout the years. The first female is the prototype of the so-called African American female. The second image shows you the same drawing, but major changes have occurred. Her hair is different, her skin is a little lighter, her features different, her clothes are different. The third drawing is a 180-degree shift from the first two. It is here where the African American history begins. First, the image is looking away from what the first two images are looking at. Second, the third female looks like she's not even from America. She looks like she can be from almost anywhere, India, Asia, Middle East, etc. Though she is a copy of the first two females, the third image has pearls on her neck. Pearls are not the preeminent jewelry among North American Amerindian females. They have many choices, mainly cloth, silver, gold, turquoise, obsidian, animal teeth, and a host of other minerals that the earth produced. This female is from the continent of Africa. When you compare her to the indigenous American females, right away you can see the differences. The African female is of a brown hue, obviously because she lives on the equator where the sun feels like it's in your lap. Also, most of Africa is desert and plains. They live in a completely different environment than the people of North America. This late 1700s drawing of the reconciliation between Britannia and her daughter America should pose some serious questions. How did America get to become Britain's daughter if America was here before Britain even knew she existed? Why is America surrounded by English, Spanish, French, and Portuguese men? Where are the American males? Why is the female depicted as America running into the arms of Britannia? And is the woman depicted as America, is she from Africa? These images are entitled Emblem of America and were published in the late 1700s. Who are the children in these images? Who are the people going into the waterfall behind them? Are we to believe that these children came to America on so-called slave ships? Do they look like slaves? This photo is entitled An Indian Warrior Entering a Wigwam with a Scout, taken from a series of letters by an officer traveling through the interior part of America. Doesn't he look like someone we all know? This drawing is signed by the author in 1695 and is called Ancestral Tablets. This drawing is from the New England part of America, around Boston. Question: are these people slaves? This drawing is from the book Biography and History of the Indians of North America by Samuel Drake. This book was published in 1834. Again, does this man look like he just got off of a slave ship? And if he did, where is he from? Is he black? Is he a Christian? Is he a Democrat? No, these are the identities that the Amerindians accepted when they became U.S. property. This is the drawing I found online. The book that it came from was written in a language I didn't understand. But notice the word above the drawing says Florida. All of the other males in the photo are dressed just like the male on the stage. Are these the indigenous people of Florida? Another Florida drawing. I would like to point out that when you search these images online, you'll find other images that are complete replicas of these. The ethnic identity of the people are always changing, just like at the Moundville Museum. This drawing is of the Caribbean. When we talk about the Arawak or Carib Indians, this is who they are. They didn't die out. They just had their identities altered. This is an early map of Paraguay in South America. Notice the indigenous people being depicted here. Notice the animals that they are with. Are those the same animals that one would find on the continent of Africa? The reason I'm showing you North America, South America, the Caribbean, and now Mexico is to show you how the empire was wiped out. The Anasazi race are the indigenous people of America. America is the landmass and the people were the Anasazi. It didn't become divided until the colonizers came and started giving out their names and we accepted them. So now instead of being Anasazi, we are black, Mexican, Puerto Rican, Jamaican, Moor, Christian, Guatemalan, and whatever else name they decide to give us. That's why the borders were put up. America has been carved into almost 100 different nations and states. This is a main obstacle to unity. These pictures are from Mexico. But what was it before it was called Mexico? The Spanish came in and claimed it theirs and named it Mexico. But who were the indigenous Mexicans? And what was their relationship to the indigenous people of North America? Or were they the same people? This is an indigenous female from Arizona. Notice the facial similarities she shares with the Aztec female from Mexico. Could these females be of the same bloodline? Indigenous males in Arizona. Notice the shelter in the background. Could the males living in the cities today go out in nature and build them a shelter to protect them from the elements? These last drawings are off the coast of California. Do these people look like they've ever been in captivity? Are we to believe that these people were kidnapped from somewhere in Africa and brought all the way to California? I hope this presentation has given you enough information to spark you to do your own research. And when you do your own research, you will come to the same conclusions that I have, that African Americans ain't African. Thank you.
I'm in the house. You in the house. We in the house. I'm in the house. You in the house. We in the house.
We be the Aboriginals. We be the esoteric seeking individual. We be the new school comedians. We stimulate sleep and Afro-kinetics. We be the synergy of being. We be the transcendentalism from convention to infinity. We be the silence unborn. We be the fluid flowing on like Jim Thorne. Salutations from the sixth world, avatars. Reincarnated mindsets from the stars. Shalom, dividing all gods from enemies. Generating vocals and vibes of energy. With divine synergy, we spread the shed light. With fundamental steps on paths to insight. Now the flight to complete reality we take. From the new school of thought to a Brent Jones break. Connects from the next, reflex like the earth. And relax with facts and the shifts give birth. As we break down monotony of secular work. Cause of why E5 mental ways get served. Now the channels we flip and satellites we be. Cause this evolution will not air on TV. Now the frequency in me is 98.6. 7 days a week in the Earth remix. We be the Aboriginals.
We be the Aboriginals.
We be the esoteric seeking individual. We be the new school comedians.
New school comedians.
We stimulate sleep and Afro-kinetics. We be the synergy of being. We be the transcendentalism from convention to infinity. We be the silence unborn. We be the fluid flowing on like Jim Thorne.
Prophets we are with the dislocated hypnotist. Keen eyesight to play the witness. Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, so help me God. Layer it in lingo to catch you off guard. Balance and act between the deep and the shallow. Make it clear enough for the slow to follow. Mankind stands still in the line for tomorrow. To get a sneak peek of the future feeling. The blockbusters of beliefs in the beat. The underground sounds of souls needing a release. Cease in the search for the sensation section. Direction that away towards intelligent infection. Addictive is the attitude if you can catch it. Thrown underhand with the soft shell, easier to hatch it. Creation of ideas, being individual. Abstract and original.
We be the Aboriginals.
We be the Aboriginals.
We be the esoteric seeking individual. We be the new school comedians.
New school comedians.
We stimulate sleep and Afro-kinetics. We be the synergy of being. We be the transcendentalism from convention to infinity. We be the silence unborn. We be the fluid flowing on like Jim Thorne. He be they be we be I be man move.
I said now he be she be they be we be I be bro shine.
I said now he be she be they be we be I be I say.
He be she be they be we be I be Aboriginal.
We be the Aboriginals. We be the esoteric seeking individuals. We be the new school comedians. We be the yeah. Yeah. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. It's like I am in the house.
I'm in the house.
It's like you are in the house. It's like we are in the house.
We in the house.
It's like oh my God. It's like I am in the house.
I'm in the house.
It's like you are in the house.
You in the house.
It's like we are in the house.
We in the house.
It's like oh my It's like, oh my God. 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 We be the esoteric singing individual. We be the new school galactics. We assimilate and have broken. We be the aboriginal. We be the aboriginal.
Copper-colored gal of mine, love you 'cause you're so refined. When you always be my clinging vine, copper-colored gal of mine, you done something to my heart. You've upset my apple cart. Tell me when the honeymoon will shine, copper-colored gal of mine. Oh gee, you're sweet as can be. Your ace is with me, and I mean aces high. Me oh my, you know why? Come on, honey, name the day. Wedding band is on the way. Life for you would always be divine. Copper-colored gal of mine, swing it on out there, baby. You're sweet as can be. Your aces with me, and I mean aces high, me oh my. You know why? Yes, yes. Come on, honey, name the day. Wedding band is on the way. Life with you would always be divine. Copper-colored gal of mine. Look at there, look at there. Look at all that good copper going to waste.
was my good fortune to lend a helping hand to the weary travelers flying from the land of bondage.
William Still was just a boy when he helped the first one escape. He never knew the man's name, only that he was being hunted by slave catchers. But in the years ahead, there would be many hundreds more. And Still vowed their stories would never be forgotten.
The heroism and desperate struggle that many of our people had to endure should be kept green in the memory of this and coming generations.
And he kept his promise. His diaries tell the secret stories of that great slave exodus known as the Underground Railroad. Impossible escapes, heartbreaking separations, and families reunited. William Still recorded it all, risking his own freedom to tell the stories of those who had the courage to run.
They were determined to have liberty, even at the cost of life.
William Still never forgot where he came from. The first generation of his family, born free. Raised in New Jersey, Still moves to Philadelphia at age 26 to work as a laborer. But he's ambitious, a man who taught himself to read and write and wants to do something with it.
He was organized, he was hardworking, he was a great communicator. I can use a lot of adjectives to describe him. Most of the good traits that we want in a great leader, he had them.
In the fall of 1847, Still applies for a job with the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society. He starts as a clerk, but he has eyes on something much bigger.
Perhaps it may be the means of more than rewarding me in some future days. I go for liberty and improvement.
His duties involve the publicly stated business of the society, correspondence, record-keeping, and the publication of an abolitionist newspaper called the Pennsylvania Freeman. But Still knows its secret purpose is the running of a covert resistance network dedicated to helping slaves escape from the South. It's a revolutionary cause.
The Underground Railroad was a mass movement of civil disobedience, and it was the first mass movement in American history when huge numbers of American people made sacrifices for other people's human rights. That never happened before.
But what they're up against is an institution with more than 2 centuries of history in America. In the southern states, slavery grows deeper roots every year.
By 1860, the dollar value of America's slaves, there were about 4 million slaves by 1860, but the dollar value of those slaves were greater than the dollar value of all of America's banks, all of America's railroads, all of America's manufacturing combined. When you look at how the economics of slavery translated into the general economy of the nation, then you can see that slavery was not just some sideshow in American society. It was the main event in American history.
In the plantation economy of the South, where cotton is king, slave labor is the engine of growth. And to slave owners, a God-given right.
See, some people figure slavery would just run its course. I don't believe it would have run its course unless there was an economic reason for us no longer to be of value. But as long as people were allowed to enslave someone else and do whatever they wanted to, they were going to do it. And fight to the death for the right to do it.
But the United States is a country divided. While slavery is deeply entrenched in the South, in the North, it had been gradually abolished with the coming of industry. The cities are full of cheap labor, and factories and machines do the work of slaves. The boundary separating free and slave states falls along the old Mason-Dixon line, extending west to the frontier. And that puts Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, on the front line of the great struggle over slavery.
Philadelphia was the first place in the United States to produce the human synergy that made the Underground Railroad and abolitionism work. That's to say, first, a large Quaker population, and the Quakers were the first organized group in the United States to collectively oppose slavery, and more than that, you had a large free black population. And those two groups are the two working together that make the Underground Railroad work so well.
A year after joining the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society, William Still has learned how the railroad works, its methods, its escape routes, and its code of secrecy.
The slave and his particular friends could only meet in private to transact the business of the Underground Railroad. All others were outsiders. The right hand was not to know what the left hand was doing.
Legend has it, it was a slave catcher who gave the Underground Railroad its name. When the runaway he was chasing seemed to just disappear, as though the earth had swallowed him up. But the name stuck. And every year, hundreds of slaves ride that railroad. Most flee from the upper slave states, but the economic threat to the South is potentially crippling.
They see the Underground Railroad as the scourge of the nation. That in fact what they are doing is making their property unsecure because it is providing an outlet for those who want to run. It's encouraging those who may not think about running to think about running. And it also illustrates, in fact, that what they are saying to the rest of the nation, that enslaved people are content in their situation, is not true.
Slave owners are puzzled by the Exodus, and they regard the Underground Railroad as nothing more than organized theft.
There were some slaveholders who actually argued that they were holding these people in slavery as a way of protecting those people, as a way of providing security for people who could not provide security for themselves. That's the way that slaveholders reconciled that great contradiction. You know, the contradiction that said, I believe in freedom, but I have those people as my slaves.
Most runaways don't make it far. They're picked up by the marshals, run down by hunting dogs, or professional slave catchers. The newspapers are full of advertisements offering rewards for the recapture of fugitives. And William Still keeps records of them, like snapshots from the life of a slave.
Ran away. A Negro woman and 2 children. A few days before she went, I burned her with a hot iron on the left side of her face. I tried to make the letter M. Ran away. A Negro man named Henry. His left eye out, some scars from a dirk on his left arm, and much scarred with a whip. $50 paid to whomever returns him. Matilda, a young mulatto, branded on the right breast with the letters NB. Had with her a small child when she ran.
Of all the reasons to run, the beatings, the hard labor, the starvation diet, none compare to the breaking apart of family. Slave auctions are big business in the South. Some cities have permanent holding pens, and the auction houses advertise their wares on Main Street, next to the tack shops and hardware stores.
Now, you can recover from the whippings, you'll have the scars, but when your children are taken from you, when your family is taken from you, that's a longing that can never be resolved. That's a longing that becomes embedded in who you are, part of your personality. So they feared that. That was the most powerless place to be, was on that auction block.
The horrors of the block was looked upon through the light of the daily heartbreaking separations it was causing to the oppressed. No pen could describe, or mind imagine. Hence many of the passengers ascribed their first undying resolution to strike for freedom to the auction block, or to the fear of soon having to take their chances thereon.
They essentially had no choice. They could remain where they were and know what they would be facing until the day they dropped dead or were whipped to death or were sold further south only to have it happen then, or they could take that chance.
William Still's own mother took that chance. She'd escaped from a plantation in Maryland long before William was born. But she'd paid a terrible price.
Like millions of my race, my mother and father were born slaves, but were not contented to live and die so. My father purchased himself in early manhood by hard toil. Mother saw no way for herself and her children to escape the horrors of bondage but by flight.
The first time Sidney Still ran, she and her 4 children were recaptured and taken back to the plantation. But she was determined to try again. William remembers her telling him about a memory that had haunted her since childhood.
She had been witness to the fact that her own father's brains had been blown out by the discharge of a heavily loaded gun, deliberately aimed at his head by his drunken master. She needed only half a chance to make a bold strike for freedom.
The second time she ran, she knew she'd never make it with all 4 children. She must choose. The 2 boys, aged 6 and 8, had the best chance of survival on their own.
I shall never forget hearing my mother speak of the night when she fled. She went to the bed where her 2 boys were sleeping, kissed them, consigned them into the hands of God, and took her departure for the land of liberty.
Now think about what that means to a person. She's got to make a decision. Which of her children is she going to leave in slavery in order for her to experience freedom and 2 of her children to experience freedom? I mean, that's a terrible choice to have to make. How do you make such a decision?
I mean, the slave master had his way with women. And so you take the girls. You figure that the boys would grow into strong men and can kind of defend themselves in some way. But the girls were just there for the taking, for the picking, for the liking, for the evening. So you grab the meekest and you run.
They traveled at night without map or compass. Only the North Star to guide them. The days they spent hiding in swamps or caves, knowing that to be spotted was to be caught.
I have a piece that I've written thinking about her, and I can remember on the inside of me in the writing, the rhythm in my head was hiding by day, running by night, running, 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 praying. Oh, my goodness, can you imagine? But they did it. They did it.
It took them weeks to reach the Delaware River and cross into the free state of New Jersey. The Still family settled on a 40-acre homestead in a remote farming community. And it's here that William was born and raised, the last of 18 children.
My mother and father were again reunited in freedom, while 2 of the little boys were in slavery. What to do for them, rather than weep and pray, were questions unanswerable. For over 40 years, the mother's heart never knew what it was to be free from anxiety about her lost boys.
Sidney changed her name to Charity and fabricated a story to throw the slave catchers off the scent. Only the Still family knows the truth about her past and those 2 little boys she'd left behind.
And William Still said that dark cloud with which he grew up shaped his character. It taught him compassion. It taught him to love freedom, to hate tyranny and slavery.
By the late 1840s, William Still has become the chief conductor on one of the busiest branches of the Underground Railroad. And his own house is a frequent stopover for runaways.
He was the secretary for the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society. He was on the Vigilance Committee out of Philadelphia. And he had a system and a whole network of people that he was working with to create an opportunity for people to get away. It was almost like a way station or a halfway house on the way through.
I mean, you realize that for a period of time, he was helping something in the neighborhood of 60 slaves a month to escape, to go farther north, sometimes all the way to Canada, from their runaway point in the South.
The Underground Railroad has now laid tracks all over the country. It's grown into a complex network of safe houses and hiding places, stretching from the South to the free states north of the Mason-Dixon line. And any slave willing to chance it can rely on William Still to be waiting on the other side. In 1849, Still is in on the most famous escape in the history of the Underground Railroad. Henry Brown is a slave in Richmond, Virginia, who'd made friends with a local merchant. And together, they cook up a wild and risky plan. The crate is just big enough for Brown to huddle inside. The merchant, a man named Samuel Smith, writes the address of the anti-slavery office on the lid, bores a single small breathing hole in the side, and nails it shut for shipment. For the next 28 hours, Henry Brown suffers in silence, fighting for air, heaved from train to steamer to wagon. By the time he arrives at the anti-slavery office, William Still doubts he's still alive.
All was quiet. The door had been safely locked. The proceedings commenced. Witnesses will never forget that moment. Saw and hatchet quickly had the lid off, and the marvelous resurrection of Brown ensued. Rising up in his box, he held out his hand, saying, "How do you do, gentlemen?" The little assemblage hardly knew what to do or think at that moment. And he was about as wet as if he'd come up out of the Delaware.
The story of Henry Box Brown becomes an international sensation. Newspapers across America and Europe print every detail.
And he became something of a media star in the North. He traveled around on the lecture circuit with a box, telling how he had escaped. And his story was reported in the South. And not surprisingly, there was much greater scrutiny of boxes being directed to northern destinations.
Sure enough, the man who'd helped Box Brown escape is undone by a new invention called the telegraph. When he tries the same trick again a few months later, the slave owner sends a message ahead to Philadelphia, and the shipment is seized. Samuel Smith is arrested, convicted of aiding fugitive slaves, and serves every minute of an 8-year prison sentence. It's a reminder that secrecy is the cardinal rule of the underground.
Prudence often dictated that even the recipients of our favor should not know the names of their helpers, and vice versa, they did not desire to know theirs. The risk of aiding fugitives was never lost sight of, and the safety of all concerned called for still tongues.
But Still has taken to breaking his own rule. He starts compiling secret notes detailing the fugitive stories. Where they'd come from, how they'd escaped, family left behind. It's a dangerous practice.
It was an incredible risk to maintain these records about people he was helping to escape, because it condemned both of them. It condemned him to being actively involved, and it condemned them and confirmed that they were escaping, stealing their labor from their owners.
But if Still knows it's dangerous, in August of 1850, an astonishing encounter convinces him it's worth the risk. The older man who comes to his door that morning introduces himself as Peter Friedman, and then tells a story that leaves Still reeling.
You believe your family is in Philadelphia? That's what I heard. Peter said that he was from Alabama. He stated that he and an older brother had been stolen away from somewhere in this direction about 41 or 42 years ago when he was a boy, only about 6 years old.
The stranger tells Still he'd been born into slavery, he thinks, in Maryland. But then at the age of 6, he and his brother had been kidnapped and sold to a slave trader in Alabama. When his older brother passed away, Peter vowed not to die a slave like him. He took on extra work as a laborer and grave digger. It was years before he saved the $500 to buy his freedom. Now nearly 50 years old, he'd come 1,600 miles searching for any scrap of information about his family.
Do you remember both of your parents' names? I then inquired of him if he knew the names of his parents, to which he replied that his father's name was Levin and his mother's name, Sidney.
William Still started to recognize the fact that he was related to Peter.
It all begins to fall into place.
An own dear brother who I had never before seen was before me. My feelings were unutterable.
And then he says, I looked at the face of my newfound brother.
I could see in the face of my newfound brother the likeness of my mother.
Still also figures out the real story behind the kidnapping Peter remembers. It was the punishment for his mother's escape.
As soon as the master realized she was successful and he could not find her, he retaliated by selling the 2 sons further south to a place that he was sure she would never find them.
It's pure chance that the brothers have found each other, and Still wonders how many others might never be reunited with their families.
It's been a long journey.
And once he had his experience with Peter Still, he realized that families that were all torn asunder, they didn't have a place to go to find one another, to find their relatives.
While I knew the danger of keeping strict records, the idea forced itself upon my mind that all over this wide and extended country, thousands of mothers and children separated by slavery were in a similar way, living without the slightest knowledge of each other's whereabouts. Thousands of escapes, harrowing separations, dark gropings after lost parents, brothers, sisters, and identities seemed ever to be pressing on my mind.
Not long after, an abolitionist newspaper carries a story on Peter Still, under the headline, "The Kidnapped and the Ransomed." It describes Peter's desperate attempts to raise $5,000 to buy his wife and 3 children from the slave owner in Alabama. The story catches the eye of a tough old underground veteran named Seth Conklin.
He learned of the story of Peter Still. It touched his heart. He came up with a plan for recovering Peter Still's family in Alabama. And there are extremely few cases on record of any Underground Railroad conductor going that deep into the South and successfully bringing away a fugitive. It was almost unheard of. So Seth Conklin's ambition to do this is remarkable in itself.
He, in the spirit of the Good Samaritan, volunteered his services without pay or reward to go and rescue the wife and 3 children of Peter Still. The magnitude of this offer can hardly be appreciated. It was literally laying his life on the altar of freedom for the despised and oppressed whom he had never seen, whose kinfolk even he was not acquainted with. Now, frankly, was he told of the great dangers and difficulties to be encountered through hundreds of miles of slave territory. In short, he was plainly told that without a very great chance, the undertaking would cost him his life.
But Conklin is an adventurer and determined to try. He travels to Alabama, posing as a miller looking for work. He finds Peter's wife and children, and they escape at night. His plan is to follow the waterways 300 miles north to Indiana and a safe station.
He did it. He succeeded. It took a week. He rode and rode and rode, and he reached Indiana. And he made it onto a line of the Underground Railroad in Indiana and traveled fairly far north, and then tragically was caught.
A few days later, Still learns from his contacts that mother and children have been sent back to Alabama. But he never hears from Seth Conklin again.
A report found its way into the papers to the effect that the white man arrested in connection with the capture of the family was found drowned, with his hands and feet in chains and his skull fractured. It proved, as his friends feared, to be Seth Conklin. And in irons upon the riverbank, there is no doubt he was buried.
The business of the Underground Railroad had always been dangerous work. But in the fall of 1850, the stakes get much higher. In an effort to appease the South and shut down the Underground Railroad, Congress passes the Fugitive Slave Act.
Fugitive Slave Law of 1850 said that every state and territory in the United States was required to return fugitive slaves or escaping African Americans to their owners or their owners' agents, and that those agents had the right to seek them out anywhere in the continental United States.
It means there's no safe haven left for fugitive slaves, no matter how far they'd run or how long ago.
The passage of the Fugitive Slave Act had such a dramatic effect on blacks across North America. Many of those people who had fled to the northern states, who had established themselves, built homes, became part of communities, and building lives there, suddenly that was threatened. No one was safe.
The new law also obliges every citizen to aid in the recapture of fugitives, under pain of imprisonment and fines.
The day the Fugitive Bill passed, Even the bravest abolitionists began to fear that a fugitive slave was no longer safe anywhere under the stars and stripes, north or south.
It's kind of like this is the last resort, and the one hope you thought you had of being free, we're going to take that. Because if you could get to the north and live as a free person, fine. But once you realize that the boundary is no longer the United States, you have to go further north, because if they catch you anywhere, they can bring you back. So you're never free. You're always looking over your shoulder. You're always dodging. You never know when someone could come and say, yeah, that's mine, I'm taking them back.
It's now infinitely more dangerous for agents in the underground, and still takes to hiding his records every night in the crypt of a cemetery.
If you read other stories of people who were involved in the Underground Railroad, what you hear is that when the 1850 Fugitive Slave Law is passed, many of them decide they're going to destroy the records that they had saved in order to make sure that they weren't caught. And I think Still is remarkable in that he is willing to continue to preserve those records despite the jeopardy that it put him in.
But if the intent of the law is to shut down the Underground Railroad, the effect is quite the opposite. The railroad doesn't go out of business, it just gets longer. Instead of making its last stop in one of the northern states, it will now extend all the way into Canada. Under British law, slavery had been illegal here since 1833.
And once this act went into effect, whole congregations of black churches, for example, made the trek across the border, for example, from Buffalo into St. Catharines and Niagara Falls. It was powerful. It was phenomenal.
Hundreds, possibly thousands, pick up stakes and flee to Canada. Many return later on, but by the hundreds, entire church groups, entire neighborhoods pick up from Pittsburgh, from the Boston area, from parts of New York State, and move to Canada where they feel safe.
In the first few months after the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act, 3,000 black Americans flood across the border. They call it Freedom's Land.
As far back as my memory goes, around the age of 10, my grandfather one day was sitting in the backyard of my hometown of Norristown, Pennsylvania, 18 miles from Philadelphia, singing a song, "There's a Highway to Heaven." And I said, "Grandpa, what are you singing about?" He said, "I'm singing about the Underground Railroad. It was the spirituals, the code of spirituals. You know, the underground, there's a highway to heaven." Heaven was referring to Canada. He said, "My father, James Bloxon, and his cousins escaped on the Underground Railroad."
The words we're saying have a double meaning. So anytime you hear anything about traveling shoes or chariots or wheels, somebody's getting ready to run. And so you take a Negro spiritual. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. That chariot is movement. That chariot is swinging low, picking you up, putting you on that Underground Railroad, taking you somewhere to freedom. So when we sing those songs, it's like, something's getting ready to happen. So I looked over Jordan, and what did I see? Jordan, that was metaphoric for the Ohio River. A band of angels coming after me. Those conductors coming to help you, coming forth to carry me home. So they had all kind of little messages. And the slave master would hear us singing and say, "Oh, don't they sound pretty happy tonight?" Next day, 2 or 3 people gone because we put that message out.
In the years before the Civil War, as many as 40,000 black Americans take refuge in Canada. None of them really know what to expect once they cross that border. But they know it's Queen Victoria's land, where slaves are free. One 12-year-old runaway says he's certain she must be just like him.
He pictures Queen Victoria as a black woman surrounded by black servants. He thinks she has to be black because he is so used to seeing cruelty at the hands of white people where he lives in the South that he just can't imagine this queen being anything but black.
Slave owners in the South, hoping to dissuade them from flight, paint a grim picture of Canada, a land of fierce cold and famine.
They would tell slaves that if they made their way to Canada, they wouldn't find any food there. They would tell them that the winters were 10 months long. They would tell them that people in Canada would make collars for their coats out of their hair. They would tell them all kinds of horrendous tales to make them so fearful of going that they would feel that remaining in slavery would be a better option.
They even spread rumors that Canadians are running their own illegal slave trade, and that the natives here are cannibals. But what William Still hears from the fugitives is that the lies only backfire.
Daily, the disposition increased among the more intelligent slaves to distrust the statements of their masters, especially when they spoke against the North. For instance, if the master told the slave that the blacks in Canada were freezing and starving to death by the hundreds, his hope of trying to reach Canada was made tenfold stronger. He was willing to risk all the freezing and starving that the country could afford. His eagerness to find a conductor then would become almost painful.
Any communication between branches of the underground is conducted through messengers or the mail service. And William Still corresponds regularly with many other station masters and agents. Even Harriet Tubman, the most famous operative in the Underground Railroad, comes to him for help. From a base in Canada, she makes a dozen trips back to the slave states, smuggling out as many as 70 people.
She seemed wholly devoid of personal fear. The idea of being captured by slave hunters seemed never to enter her mind. She would not suffer one of her party to whimper once about giving out and going back, however weary they might be from hard travel. She had a very short and pointed rule of her own. Once enlisted, they had to go through or die. So, when she said to them that a live runaway could do great harm by going back, but that a dead one could tell no secrets, she was sure to have obedience.
In the spring of 1856, William Still records a high watermark in the annals of the underground. In a single day, 17 fugitives passed through his hands on their way north. There are 2 sisters in mourning veils who'd escaped right under the nose of their owner by joining a funeral cortege. A group of young men arrives after stealing a carriage and horses and fighting off an attack by slave catchers. Then, 2 families with children are taken in after Still was tipped off by a policeman who was supposed to arrest them at the train station. Philadelphia has now emerged as one of the central stations of the Underground Railroad, and Still's involvement is the worst-kept secret in the city. He seems an easy caller for the federal marshals.
It would have been extremely easy to stake out his house. Frankly, it probably was staked out often. But the fact is, the Underground Railroad, in Philadelphia at least, was protected by public opinion. There was really no political will to speak of in Philadelphia to prosecute activists in the Underground Railroad.
What's more, Pennsylvania law stipulates that any slave entering the state in the company of his or her master is automatically entitled to freedom. And William Still himself puts that law to the test. Still is working in the Philadelphia anti-slavery office when a porter from the Dockside Hotel delivers a hastily written note.
Mr. Still, sir, Will you come down to Bloodgood's Hotel as soon as possible, as there are fugitive slaves here and they want liberty?
The note had come from Jane Johnson, a slave traveling to New York with her owner, a prominent politician named John Wheeler.
When he set up the trip, he made a big mistake. The fugitive slave law was clear. Runaways would be returned to their master, and everyone had to participate in the capture of a runaway. But there was no law that said that a slave who was taken to a free state by a master had to be returned to him.
Still and a colleague race down to the docks, arriving just as the 5 o'clock ferry is about to sail. They find Jane on deck, and Still tells her she has the right to walk away.
You are entitled to your freedom according to the laws of Pennsylvania, having been brought into the state by your owner. If you prefer freedom to slavery, you have the chance to accept it now. Act calmly. Don't be frightened by your master. We cannot force you to leave. We only want to make you sensible of your rights. Remember, if you lose this chance, you may never get such another.
When Jane replies, "I want my freedom," Still hustles her off the ferry and into a waiting carriage. But it's not over. Her owner is a senior official in the federal government, with friends high up in the justice system. And a few days later, William Still is arrested on charges of riot, assault, and battery.
Because it was such a high-profile event, it was news at the time. It was very widely reported. The federal government and its agents in Philadelphia, its allies in the local Democratic Party, the pro-slavery party of the time, saw this as an opportunity perhaps to crack the anti-slavery office.
The federal case against William Still rests on Wheeler's claim that his slave had actually been abducted. But it all falls apart when a surprise witness appears. Jane Johnson. As a free woman now, she can legally testify in Still's defense.
Deliberately, Jane answered in a ladylike manner to her name, and then was the observed of all observers. Nobody forced me away. Nobody pulled me, and nobody led me. I went away of my own free will. I had rather die than go back.
Judge John Kane, a slave owner himself, reluctantly concedes the prosecution has no case against Still. The victory encourages the champions of the Underground Railroad and enhances Still's reputation as one of its best agents.
And he was the guy. I don't even know if I'm using this correctly. I'm thinking he was the go-to guy. He got things done.
And he'd come up with some new tricks. On his advice, 15-year-old Anne Maria Weems escapes from Washington, D.C. by disguising herself as Joe the coachman. Still arranges for his own doctor to meet her with horse and carriage right outside the White House.
This done, the order was given to Joe, drive on. Joe bravely obeyed. The horse trotted off willingly, and the doctor sat in the carriage as composed as though he had succeeded in procuring an honorable and lucrative office from the White House and was returning home to tell his wife the good news.
They arrive at William Still's house in Philadelphia on Thanksgiving Day. But there's a $500 bounty on Maria's head, so the next morning, he passes her on to another agent for the trip north to Canada. Several branches of the underground lead to the border, but two main trunks carry most of the traffic. One line crosses over at Niagara Falls, the other runs through the gateway at Detroit. But even that final journey is risky. Slave hunters hover around the border towns, and fugitives sometimes get caught right on freedom's doorstep. But still, they come. By now, there are black settlements growing rapidly all over southern Ontario, often fairly close to the Canada-US border. One of the most successful is at Buxton, near the town of Chatham, 50 miles across the river from Detroit.
You see those attachments as communities are being built. People from Mississippi living beside people from Arkansas, beside people from Alabama, Pennsylvania, Delaware, all these different states that they came from. And makes you realize in so many ways, sometimes even just small ways, they did indeed find that promised land that they used to dream about when they were children.
At its height, the Buxton settlement is a thriving community of about 1,200 former slaves. But thousands of others are settling in the cities of Chatham, Amherstburg, or Toronto, and dozens of small communities in between. And for most, it's the first taste of citizenship.
People could vote, which was huge. They could serve on juries. They could testify on their own behalf in court. What a tremendous civil right, a real civil right to have access to. Could educate their children and themselves. This was, if not perfect, and I don't think it was perfect, it was better than the idea of being carried back to slavery, which could happen to them in any of the northern states.
But if the fugitives had found freedom from slavery here, they are not safe from racism. Many of the white settlers fear the influx of black Americans will depreciate property values, discourage investment, and drive out established white families.
Many people think that freedom meant that black people got everything that everyone else got immediately. That really isn't the case. What they got was free. They had to get the rest. Does it mean that there were issues? Absolutely, because we have incidences of race riots. In some places, petitions were drawn up seeking the removal of black residents.
William Still, the man who would send so many fugitives to Canada, decides to see for himself what kind of place it is. He tours the black settlements all over southwest Ontario and returns more determined than ever to keep the railroad going full throttle.
We can do for ourselves what nobody else can do. The hundreds of heroic fugitives who yearly throw off their yokes, passing through indescribable perils and hardships on their way to Canada, seem to cry aloud in our ears, "Hereditary bondmen, know ye not who would be free themselves must strike the blow?"
But by April 1861, the Underground Railroad had run its course. When the first shots of the Civil War are fired at Fort Sumter, it's all out in the open. 2 months after the outbreak of war, William Still resigns his position with the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society. In his 14 years in the service of the Underground Railroad, he'd helped more than 800 fugitive slaves to escape.
He didn't invent the Underground Railroad, but he ran arguably the most important or the busiest single Underground Railroad operation in the country. And that took a lot of skill. Very, very few people were lost in Philadelphia, thanks to William Still. And in the 1840s and 50s, that's the measure of success. Did you lose people? Were they recaptured? And in Philadelphia, almost nobody.
On July 3rd, 1863, It was said that the smoke from the battlefield at Gettysburg could be seen drifting in over the Canadian border. On that day, there were former slaves who'd once found refuge here, fighting in the ranks of the Union Army. William Still also went to war for the Union, procuring supplies for the Army base at Camp William Penn, just outside Philadelphia. Coming home from the camp one day, he boarded a city streetcar. The conductor refused him a seat. Somebody else might have walked away. Not William Still. He launched an 8-year campaign that went all the way to the state governor and led to the desegregation of Philadelphia streetcars. After the war, Still went into the coal business and proved to be as shrewd in commerce as he had been in the smuggling game. He became a wealthy man. At the final meeting of the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society in 1872, Still was granted permission to publish the secret notes he'd kept.
And so, while we have the stories that are true and that are heart-gripping about the slavery movement itself, we have the wonderful, wonderful story of man's humanity to man, of people helping one another. And if it had not been for William and his writing, we would not know about that.
And in telling the story of the Underground Railroad, William Still hoped he was also writing a kind of personal guidebook to history.
His sense of the historical importance of capturing their stories so that it might lead to future reunification of families was incredibly important.
And it has been a goldmine over time for helping families to reconnect with each other, both in Still's day and in later generations. It is still used today to help reunite the separated descendants of fugitive slaves.
The New York Times called William Still the father of the Underground Railroad, but he saw himself as just another soldier for the cause. It was those who'd had the courage to run he admired.
He believed that the future generations needed heroes, and here were the most heroic people that he could imagine without any better counterpart in history. And so he wanted these stories for the future.
William Still died in 1902 at the age of 81. By then, his book was recognized as the most authentic account of the brightest moments in one of America's darkest chapters.
Now we know who these people were. It's not just a mass of faceless, nameless people who were bent over picking cotton. They were individuals, and their stories are deserving to be remembered.
Now, thank God, we have no more slavery to oppress us. We have no more tyrants to flee from. The prison house and the Underground Railroad are things of the past. Let us not forget the days of our bondage, however, but let us keep constantly in memory the pit from whence we were digged and the rock from whence we were hewed, that our children may see what their parents have suffered and stand up fully for God and freedom while life lasts.
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low.
Underground Railroad, the William Still story, is available on DVD. To order, visit shoppbs.org or call us at 1-800-PLAY-PBS.
You're watching PBS.
It's the same hustle, it's the same thing, the same tears on everything. Maybe one day we'll see we're one big family, like it's one shadow. It's the same sunshine, it's the same rain, the same struggle just to maintain. Maybe one day we'll see we're one big family, like it's one shadow. Yeah. Somebody found working fingers to the bone.
Greetings, and welcome to An American Deception, revealing America's dark-skinned past. I'm your host, Tavis Sanders. I'd like to welcome our co-host, Renee Sanders.
Greetings.
So today we wanted to give you an overview of Indeed, a nonprofit organization established to educate the public of the omitted history of the dark-skinned indigenous peoples of the southeastern United States. As a part of Indeed's mission, we've created An American Deception. An American Deception was built to educate the public. And so let's talk about some of the services that we offer through Indeed.
Okay, one of the things that we offer are educational presentations. These educational presentations are, again, to inform the public about the dark-skinned indigenous people of southeastern United States. First one is called the Mound Builders. And the Mound Builders is explaining about the people that were here before the Europeans arrived, the different types of mounds that they built, which were conical mounds, platform mounds, and the effigy mounds, which were the mounds that were in the shapes of animals or some kind of a religious symbol or figure.
I know they also called them dirt pyramids.
Some of the mounds were called dirt pyramids because some of them have flat sides. And the ones that are flat-sided, they do call them pyramids. They're four-sided, and there's also some five-sided ones. But most of them, really, they look like mountains or hills.
Okay.
And those were mounds, and as a matter of fact, when Europeans arrived here, they really didn't realize that they were built by the indigenous people here. So many of them were destroyed. And this is one of the things that we discuss in the Mound Builders.
Okay, and I know that you said we have a few educational presentations. I know one of them is called The Native American Slave Trade, Who Were the Real Slaves? Can you give us a little bit of information about that?
Yes, the Native American slave trade is something that they really leave out of the history books, where they don't discuss how the indigenous people here in the United States were used as slaves. As a matter of fact, they were the first slaves here in the United States. And the African slave trade was really built on top of the Native American slave trade. So this is one of the things that we discuss in that, who were the real slaves, because once you really delve into that, you would really find out that many of those dark-skinned people that were enslaved, many of them were the indigenous native people of the United States.
All right. And I know we have one more educational presentation entitled Brown, Black, and White, Race and Native Americans. Could you just give me a brief overview?
Yes, that one is really talking about the race laws that were here in the United States, and it is showing how laws were used against the indigenous people to turn them into something that they were not. So it turned the indigenous people into Negroes. Negroes became equivalent to slave. Slave became equivalent to African, which now made all the indigenous people now Africans. And many of them now are calling themselves African Americans, but they're really indigenous to the United States.
And so you're talking about the black population also. That's another term that we use to identify ourselves.
Yes, that's correct, yes.
So we offer educational presentations, and those are the titles of the three. We offer them in various ways. We have the presentations that we actually do inside of schools, libraries, and museums. And we also have a documentary series that we offer the programs through.
Okay, along with the presentations and the DVDs that we do offer about those presentations, we also have what we call community beautification that we do here in the city of Philadelphia. We feel that it is important to give back to the communities, and it is important for us to show that example to the neighborhoods also, so that hopefully they will join us in beautifying and keeping our neighborhoods clean and keeping them proud of where they live.
Yeah, and just to touch on that subject, I know when we do go out and do the cleanups, we have a lot of elders and actually a lot of the young children. They come and participate when we're doing them on their blocks or in a park near their home. And it really does seem to put a sense of pride in something that they've done to accomplish in their neighborhood.
Yes, and we don't even have to ask them to come out. We don't even solicit. We just go there and we start cleaning up, and the people see that, and they come out and join us.
Okay. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. So I know we have a short version of our educational documentary, The Mound Builders. I'd like for them to take a look at that, and we'll be right back.
Greetings, I'm your host Red Tail. Welcome to an introduction to The Mound Builders, the first in a 4-part series entitled An American Deception. We'll see you in a few minutes.
Brown-skinned people, from very light to the darkest of dark, have existed in the Americas continuously for many thousands of years. Writer Jack Forbes, in his book Africans and Native Americans, said, "Many, but not all, Native Americans were brown or dark-colored without African ancestry. These brown-skinned people lived here long before the dawn of European civilization and the arrival of the European settlers. When the Europeans arrived to the shores of the United States, they encountered a culture of people that became known as the Mound Builders. Mound Builder is a general term referring to the indigenous inhabitants of North America who built various styles of earthen mounds for burial, residential, and ceremonial purposes. Here you see a sampling of mound sites that have been discovered in the United States. These mounds are primarily visible from the Mississippi River to the Appalachian Mountains, from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. Most are located along rivers and streams which the Native Americans used for provisions. The most modern Native American cultures have been divided into 3 eras. The Archaic era, from 8000 BCE, or before the Christian era, to 1000 BCE. The Woodland era, from 1000 BCE to 1000 CE, or the Christian era. And the Mississippian era, from the years 1000 to 1700. And there is evidence of mound builders in all 3 eras. The mound builders have been attributed to building 4 basic types of mounds. The most common mounds are the conical mounds. Conical mounds are mounds that are cone or oval shaped. Many of these types of mounds were for burial purposes. Burial mounds ranged in height from 3 feet to 25 feet, and the remains were probably of someone of importance in the society. Conical mounds that weren't burial mounds can have heights up to 70 feet. The second type of mound is the earthen mound or earthen lodge. This type of mound usually had a fire pit in the center and was used for important meetings amongst the chiefs. The Europeans, after their arrival, utilized these mounds by turning them into their military forts, amongst other things. The third type of mounds are effigy mounds. Effigy mounds are mounds that are in the shape of animals, symbols, religious, or human figures. These mounds may have served as territorial markers or enhanced sacred ceremonial ground where people met for major events. Modern Native American shaman or spiritual healers suggest that the effigy mounds enhanced the power for healing and communication with the ancestor spirits. The last type of mound is the platform mound. Platform mounds or temple mounds are flat-topped mounds which were used to house temples for the leaders, for ceremonial purposes, sometimes for residences, and sometimes for survival needs such as observing up and down the waterways for unwanted visitors.
Welcome back. Even here in Philadelphia, there are remnants of these great and ancient structures. I stand now at the steps of Philadelphia's famous landmark, the Philadelphia Museum of Art. But did you also know that this historic location, which the museum now occupies, was once called Fairmount by the colonial settlers? Up until the time of colonial settlement, this land belonged to the indigenous Americans. And if the mound would have remained undisturbed, it would have been classified as a platform mound today. In 1812, an engine house was built at the bottom of Fairmount to pump water from the Schuylkill River to the top. This later became known as the Fairmount Waterworks. In 1919, the mound began its most recent transformation into what is now known as the Philadelphia Museum of Art. You have just finished watching the first in the 4-part series entitled An American Deception. For more information, please email us at anamericandeception@gmail.com.
We'll be right back with An American Deception on Philly Cam.
Welcome back to An American Deception, revealing America's dark-skinned past. In the first segment, we went over the history of Indeed and some of the services that we offer to the community. But I'd like to ask you now, what about history, and why do you think that is important?
I think it's important because it has been left out of the history books. The history of the dark-skinned indigenous people here in the United States has not really totally been revealed. Any place where history is told, they seem to eliminate the dark-skinned indigenous people here. So it is important for the people here in the United States, everyone, for them to know this history so that some of these dark-skinned people who are labeling themselves maybe as African American may find out that they are not actually African American, but that they are Indian, really, or indigenous to this land, Native Americans, or however you want to, whatever terminology that you are comfortable with.
Yeah, I kind of look at it like, if you leave a large block of history out of the books that people are educated on, turn those people into something else, something that fits the status that the people that are writing these books want to fit these people as. You can identify them as being this because you remove the history of who they really are.
Exactly. And when people begin to realize that that term Negro, which was defining the dark-skinned people here in the United States, was also including a population of people who were here already. So the native people, the indigenous people of the United States, many of them were dark-skinned people. Dark-skinned, some of them had woolly hair. It is not the depiction that we see now of what they want us to think that how the Native Americans looked. Mm-hmm. And these people have been left out of history.
And I like to bring it up to speed today too, because when you learn where you're from, you start to care more about that environment. And as black people, especially in the inner cities, we see a very, very big discrepancy between the neighborhoods that they live in and who they really want to be. Everybody wants to go back to where they think that they came from, and so they don't care about what's happening here as much.
Yes, exactly. And when people can when people can connect those dots to a history, to a real history that that doesn't stop at 1860. You know, you have a history that connects people to this landmass for thousands of years. Yes, exactly. You know, they will begin to take more pride in this land because now they know where their roots are, that their roots haven't been taken away from them, that they were stolen from them, but now they can reclaim them again. And that's why we think this is important for this information to come out.
Right. And, you know, we just like to identify also that, you know, a lot of the information that you'll be getting from us, you'll also be able to find them. You know, we want to make sure that we're not just giving you information, but we're giving you factual information. You know, I know that Napoleon stated that history was a myth that men tend to agree upon. And I really don't like that. I don't like that history is a myth that is created by the writer.
Yes, history, one of the definitions of history is that it defines who you are and why you are the way you are. So if you don't know your history, you cannot truly know who you really are.
Well, yeah, I totally agree with you. But, you know, let's talk about that point for a moment, because I know in a lot of magazines, I know on some television programs, even some of the programs that trace people's heritage will, you know, the individual will initially say, I heard that I have Native American in my blood. And then when they go through the program or the DNA test, or the individual does ancestry trait on that individual, they will move them away from that.
Well, again, I think you have to be very, very careful when you're going with those things. And again, because the people who are doing them may not really know the actual history. And they are going by maybe colonial laws that said that that if you had one drop of African blood, then you are now a Negro. But the problem is that some of those people who are being defined as African were not African at all. They were defined that because of the laws that made slave and African equivalent. So what happened was these laws, again, turned these people into something that they were not.
And now that you've changed the individual to something, or you've relabeled them or reclassified them or re-identified who they are, and now it gets back to today, you know, where a group of people can't really relate to what they're being taught. And so since I can't relate to the individual or to the culture that is being taught to me about who I am or where I'm from, if the culture exists at all, and so they move away from their community, they move away from family and respect to the elders, and they become distracted with whatever it is that they can get themselves involved with that'll make themselves feel better about what they're doing, because we've lost who we are.
Yes, and that was one thing that that especially in the early 1900s and in the 20th century, that Black people were trying to identify with something. And we know that Black people have been told that you know you have Native American in your blood, you know you have that Indian in your blood. And we have heard this, and many Black families have heard that. And we've heard that because our ancestors did not want us to forget that. And they couldn't write it down because it was against the law for them to write it down. So they had to pass this history down orally. Right. And we have that oral history. However, because the history books wanted to turn us into something else, then we can no longer identify with that. And this is what history has done, has turned us into something that our ancestors told us that we were not. But now we are believing, because in the past 50 years, we've been told we're African American, so now we tend to believe that's what we are.
And in actuality, we may be something else.
Yes.
You know, and a large portion of us, even if we choose to identify ourselves as African American, you should still know the whole history of who you are, the full history and the factual history about who you are, where you came from, and how to relate the two cultures into one.
Yes, and again, because if you were told that you have Native in your blood, that Native is still there.
All right. Well, we like to wrap it up for right now. We'll be back with more of An American Deception. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back with more of An American Deception on Philly Can.
Today, a more accurate depiction of the Native Americans of the United States is beginning to unfold. Because history has been told to us by Europeans with a European point of view, we have, up until recently, been given our historical facts in a distorted manner. Author Carol Birkin, in her book First Generations, explains that historians have come to understand that they must handle journals, government reports, sermons, books, and diaries written by Europeans about Native Americans cautiously, as artifacts of European adjustment to cultural diversity rather than true guides to Indian societies. This European adjustment has given us a distorted view and has allowed many misconceptions and inaccuracies to be perpetrated. Case in point, most people believe that the existence of dark-skinned people in the United States began with the African slave trade. The truth is, as writer Jack Forbes expresses in his book Africans and Native Americans, many but not all Native Americans were of a dark complexion without African ancestry. Truth be told, it was the Native American slave trade that placed many dark-skinned people into slavery. And to keep these facts in obscurity, many books evade the subject of the Native American slave trade. William L. Katz, in his book Black Indians, says it eloquently when he states that omission, not distortion, is the far more serious culprit in hiding the story of the Black Indians of the Americas. At the time of European contact, there were dozens of chiefdoms scattered across the South, one so large that it spanned from present-day eastern Tennessee to northern Georgia and eastern Alabama. After Hernando de Soto and other explorers encountered these chiefdoms, many became unstable via diseases, warfare, and slavery. Although many attribute the demise of many native people to diseases that they did not have natural immunities to, one must examine forces other than disease, in particular, the commercial trade in Indian slaves, to the termination of many southern clans, tribes, and chiefdoms. As the European arrived to the shores of America, they began utilizing the native people to help build their colonies. The Native Americans welcomed their new neighbors, and using the words of writer Alan Gallet, Indians secured the colonies against external and internal foes while providing the economic wherewithal for each colony's survival. He goes on to say they, the Native Americans, chose not to conquer the Europeans. He says warfare was conducted for specific cultural and geopolitical purposes, and the removal of the European colonies did not meet those ends. The Europeans were not as cordial to their new neighbors. The Europeans, beginning with Christopher Columbus, began enticing and tricking the native population into servitude. And as I have previously stated, Christopher Columbus initiated the transatlantic slave trade by transporting thousands of Native Americans to Spain to become slaves in the Mediterranean slave trade. Slavery was considered a part of any expedition of discovery and conquest. So as stated in Indian slavery during colonial times, not to follow such a custom would have been acting contrary to the spirit of the times. During exploring expeditions in America, leaders like Hernando de Soto and Ponce de Leon needed a means to reward the services of their soldiers. Since other means of payment were scarce, slavery satisfied this need. And again, using the words of writer Almond Wheeler Lauber from his book Indian Slavery During Colonial Times, many of the exploring expeditions were slave raids or kidnapping excursions. The captured women were distributed amongst the soldiers and used in whatever manner the soldiers saw fit, which means many of those women were raped. The captured men assisted in whatever menial task needed to be done, such as mining, fishing, paddling, hunting, cutting wood, and of course, building houses. Slave raids became common in the South, and most slaves were basically kidnapped from their tribes. However, as more Europeans arrived, kidnapping was no longer a viable system of obtaining the number of slaves that was needed to help build and maintain the new colonies. Warfare and trade became a more productive way to obtain slaves. Warfare was a way the Native Americans acquired captives before the arrival of the Europeans. These captives, which the Europeans confused with slaves, were used for specific purposes. They became a medium of exchange between tribes to purchase peace with a stronger tribe, make reparations for losses of war within a tribe, barter for war captives, amongst other things. Even though the Europeans used warfare as a means of obtaining slaves since their arrival in the Americas, by the late 16th century, early 17th century, it became practically the sole means of acquiring Native American slaves. The Native Americans then began to be enticed with European-made goods in exchange for any slaves they turned over to the Europeans. Native goods, such as hatchets, scissors, hoes, knives, etc., which were made from bone, stone, or wood, were inferior to the same tools manufactured by the European because theirs were made out of metal. These metal tools made work quicker and easier, so they became in big demand amongst the native people. Clothing, such as white linen shirts, petticoats, jackets, and woolen blankets, were also popular items to trade with the native population. The most valuable European goods were guns and ammunition.
It's the same hustle, it's the same thing, the same tears on everything. Maybe one day we'll see we're one big family, like it's one shadow. It's the same sunshine, it's the same rain, the same struggle just to maintain. Maybe one day we'll see we're one big family, like it's one shadow. Yeah. Somebody found working fingers to the bone. Somebody got a cousin getting that thug feels alone. Somebody fam got weight on the block, AKs on the block, might spray on the block, y'all. Somebody fam still on welfare, oh yeah. Somebody on the grind for daycare, oh yeah. You got thugging in your family tree, then somebody out there kidding me. Everybody say it's the same hustle, same thing, same tears on everything. Maybe one day we'll see we're one big family, like it's one shadow. Same sunshine, same rain, same struggle just to maintain. Maybe one day we'll see We're one big family, like it's one channel. Yeah. Somebody fam got a Benz on tens. Somebody push a bucket with a car full of friends. Somebody fam locked up, trying to get blinged up, trying to flip green up, couldn't give the street up, y'all. Somebody fam pray for better days.
No. Brother Hill, what do you see?
I see a grocery store. What do you see?
I see a whole mess of Negro dollars going into white pockets. Now look at that. They'll take our money, but they despise us so much, they will not touch our hands in the exchange. Money is power, Brother Hill.
You ain't lying.
And why are we turning over our power to people who despise us?
But Dr. Johns, the members of our congregation are professional people. They're not business-oriented.
Yeah, and that's our biggest mistake. Right now, we are only consumers. If we're only consumers, we're parasites.
Do you want a definition of perpetual motion? Give the average Negro a Cadillac and tell him to park it on some land that he owns. If gold was discovered in the hottest regions of hell, the whites would be there within a fortnight, mining it for all its wealth. The coloreds would show up 3 weeks later, offering their services as maids and butlers. The thing to do is to get there first, but we don't think that way. Just to show you what can be done on a small parcel of land, I grew these at the parsonage. I left the roots and the tops on to prove they are not store-bought. The Bible tells us that a feast is made for laughter, and wine maketh merry, but money answereth all things. Now, what does that mean? It means that whoever controls the money has all the answers. You get control of the money by producing. Negroes need to own more businesses, and Negroes need to patronize those businesses. By the way, I noticed that some of you were staring at my feet this morning because I had neglected to wear shoestrings. Well, I'll start wearing them when Negro folks start producing them.
Deacon Wilkes. Have you seen what our famous preacher is up to now?
Get in your hand.
Shameful.
Stockings, pencils. You need it, I got it. 29 cents. 10 cents, 2 cents.
That's too much for that air.
Morning, Abernathy.
Good day, Reverend Johns. Look at all this.
Buy wholesale and sell retail. Anybody can do it. Eventually, I plan to set up a store in the basement of the church.
This is something my First Baptist congregation should be doing.
Reverend Abernathy, between you and me, these nylon stockings are not big sellers amongst my congregation. It's a matter of modesty, the size of the thighs.
Well, I'm sure the question of size would be a difficult question for the good women of Dexter. But we ain't modest in my church. I'll sell all of these nylons next Sunday.
We'll work out the details later.
Great idea. Wish I had thought of it.
Watermelons! Sweet, juicy watermelons!
Oh, Lord.
What's wrong with selling watermelon?
Don't you be coy with me. You know how it looks for the learned preacher to be seen by Montgomery's whites selling watermelon. Why do you tease them like that?
It's their false pride.
Well, Dee would never say it to you, but she's being teased by a few of her friends at school.
Good. It builds character.
You are an irascible old man.
Looks like we may be getting a visit from some of the good people of Montgomery. I'll go say hello.
You sit still or I'll break your arm. This is no game.
Have you seen how the whites are laughing at us? It's embarrassing. They are calling him the watermelon man.
That may be so, but everything he sells, we put on our own tables. And half the proceeds are going back into Dexter's coffers.
We needn't debase ourselves for a few pennies. Every stereotype we've worked hard to rise above is being thrown in our faces. Can you argue with that, Deacon Hill?
No, it's embarrassing. But I understand the point he's trying to make. Perhaps it's not the best example.
Dr. Johns has forgotten that Dexter Avenue Baptist Church is our church, not his. Dr. Johns, we request that you stop selling produce in front of the church. It's undignified.
Was it undignified that our Savior Jesus Christ was a carpenter? Gentlemen, I have a duty to provide you with the gospel, but I have a right to provide you with food. As far as I'm concerned, I will sell anything except whiskey and contraceptives. Matter of fact, I get 40 calls about beets and turnips for every one I get about religion. Good day, gentlemen.
I'm wishing on a star.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The way you are. Let me talk. I made it by myself. No nigga help. Didn't make it in time, so my baby mama left.
I'm wishing on a star.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The way you are. Let me talk. I made it by myself. No nigga help. Didn't make it in time, so my baby mama left. All I needed was support, just to get me out the shell. Now I'm flying in that Porsche. Niggas plotting on my wealth. Was the man of the house. Had to get up out my mama crib. $0 kinda hard to find a place to live. $0 kinda hard to take care of your kids. My brother gone, shit, he had to do that little bit. Been infatuated with drugs since a youngin'. Since a youngin', I've been motherfucking thuggin'. 15 with a bomb, hustler ambition. Little sister wanted college, shit, I'm paying her tuition. But she skipping school for a piece of dick. Pregnant with a baby, college ain't on the list. What? No more grandma? Shit, I never had a grandma. I know you got a plan, ma. Help me understand, ma. But I'm a motherfucking man, ma. Let these niggas know that I ain't playing, ma. Uncle got life. Dad wasn't around. Growing up, I had to fight. All they did was clown me. Now the same niggas wanna pound me, saying they knew that I would make it, but I know they wanna take it. God had my soul, the streets had my life. Blood in my head, cold sweats every night. Then I had a son and I got locked up for murder. 50 grand to my lawyer, just let that shit go away. I wanna see.
The chapel is dedicated to Santa Maria de los Buenos Aires. Saint Mary of the Good Winds was the patron saint of navigators and a favorite of Columbus. This altar painting dates from shortly after Columbus died and features what's considered the first and most accurate portrait of the great explorer on the left. It's also thought to be the first painting of Indians done in Europe. The Virgin's cape seems to protect everyone under it, even the Indians.
When I was reading to prepare for this interview, I was quite surprised to see you use the word Aborigines talking about African Americans. You use the word Aborigines talking about African Americans. You use the word Aborigines talking about African Americans. You use the word Aborigines talking about African Americans.
You know, race relations issues, things like that. I mean, I have a freedom that a lot of people don't have because of that.
Because you use the word Aborigine.
Because I've been through the fire.
I didn't think it was over, but I didn't think it would come to this.
We're not able to get up and just go. We don't have transportation. I mean, we live in paycheck to paycheck. I mean, it ain't like we could just able to get up and just leave.
I heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord, but you don't really goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall and the major lift, the baffled king composing hallelujah.
Weren't the Pilgrims. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. The rock was landed on us.
100 years later, the Negro has still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land.
Right? On page 24, he say in any case, at least 3,000 Americans, Native Americans, who are all reclassified as Negroes, are known to have been shipped to Europe between 1493 and 1501, which is during the Columbus expeditions, as we stated earlier. So that became a little bit more clearer on how many actually was taken. About 3,000. They were shipped from here. Now, you know, they told you that the shipping came from Africa to the Americas.
That's what they
but
say.
But the earliest records of slavery happened from taken from the Moors here and was taken into Africa and different parts of Europe. Now, there's another good book called What They Never Told You in History class by Indo-Kemet Kush. And he says the first Americans were black.
Yeah. Got it.
And so y'all go and check that out. All right. Matter of fact, he says Colonel A. Bradgen say that he saw in a collection in Ecuador a statuette of a Negro that is at least 20,000 years old. He added some statues of the Indian gods in Central America possess typical Negroid features, and certain prehistoric monuments there undoubtedly represent Negroes. This is in the shadows of Atlantis. So you where Atlantis was. And who was on Atlantis?
Yeah.
Now,
Repeat that again?
Yeah. The book is called The Shadow of Atlantis, where he made that statement that there was a Negroid statuette that was at least dated 20,000 years old. And he said that that the Indian gods in Central America, that their gods had typical Negroid features.
Yeah.
And he said it's undoubtedly that all the prehistoric monuments represent Negroes.
Europeans up there, didn't they?
Yeah.
Their own European brothers and sisters did that to them.
Yes, this is a colonel. Colonel A. Bradgen. Braghine. Bradgen. So this is a colonel who fought for them, who died when there was blood and sweat and tears and adapt and overcome and conquer and all that good shit. Wrote the book, The Shadow of Atlantis. and he just breaks out and say every damn thing was Negro and shit. The shit been here at least 20,000 years, niggas.
So think about it. You went past 10,000 years because the 101 that says that the flag is 10,000 years old, but then in the 102 it says 75,000 years.
Well, at least 50, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
So, this is some deep stuff here. Oh, yeah.
And it keeps going further and further back, don't it?
Yeah. Deeper and deeper.
Yeah. So here, the Empress Veriasi Terra Washita Tunica Godstone El Bay, she writes and she states that the Washita are the original inhabitants of what is now named the North, Central, and South Americas. Therefore, the Washita are not Indians. We do not accept the name African American, colored, or Indians. We, the people of North America, are predominantly Washita, the ancient mound builders. We were here thousands of years before the amalgamated so-called Indian. The Washita Empire had many descendants, and she said the 12 Shoshone nations, Cherokee, Creek, Chickasaw, Chickasaw, Seminole,
Mm-hmm.
Choctaw, which is the 5 civilized tribes.
My great-great-grandmother.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
But it's called Blackfoot, Tar Heel.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all of that is part of the Choctaw and part of the Cherokee. Arikara, Sioux, Kiowa, Mohawk. All right. Cheyenne, Mandan, the Yamasee, the Arawak, the Lumbee, the Montauk, the Nanacoke Moors, as we spoke about, which is the Lenape, the Ben Ishmaelites, the Melungeons. And you can go and check the Melungeons. They just got a new article out in which that just came out in which that states that the Melungeons, they try to give all these fancy conclusions. Oh, well, they Spaniards, so they're Portuguese. They all this. The article says, let's just get down to business. These was blacks and white women. These was black men and white women, and this their offspring. In other words, these are Moors already here, and you mixed in with Moors. Just stop playing. That's what a Melungeon is. This is the family line in which that several of these presidents come from, like Abraham Lincoln, like Calvin Coolidge. All right, like Dwight D. Eisenhower. All right, all these individuals came from this Melungeon bloodline.
Now you see his mother, Eisenhower's brother, look like he spit him out.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's why I show him in the book with his dark ass features, big lips and everything. I'm like, oh yeah, you can't hide from this pic right here, nigga. You can't hide from this one. But the Mohegans, the Comanche, the Nez Perce, the Natchez, the Pawnee, all right, the Tuscarora, the Washoe, the Catawba, the Micmac, the Osage, the Jinnikinson, the Mattapani, the Powhatan, the Wampanoag, and many, many more tribal nations. All of them, it's Washington. They was all Moors. These are Moors. All right, these are Moors. Even though they've been called Native Americans, these are Moors. And how we know? Go to a book. It's called The Songs of the Earth. All right, these are actually photos of Edward Curtis. All right, but in the Songs of the Earth, check this out now. It says check this out now. This is coming from Spokane Gary. All right, Spokane Gary was chief from Washington State. You know, Spokane Gary. Check out what he says now. We are black. Hold on. God damn. Hold up. God damn. I'm sorry, y'all, but this some crucial shit.
It is.
Spokane Gary, all the way in Washington State, back in 1811, who died in 1892. He was born in 1811, died in 1892 now. He was a chief of a Native American Indian, so-called Indian tribe. And he comes out and says, yo, we are black. And if we cut ourselves, the blood will be red. And so with the whites, it is the same. Though their skin may be white, I am of another nation. When I speak to you, you do not understand me. When you speak, I do not understand you. This is the translation, all right? So even though it says that they black, you know it's the metaphor. You know what they were saying. They were dark hued.
Right.
So right there, right, this is from the Songs of the Earth. This is an actual chief telling you that they were black before the so-called black, you know what I'm saying, thing of the 1960s. Before the black pride thing of the 1960s happened.
So he could have used the name. He could have used the name more, and they just edited it out.
Bingo, you got it.
Right. Like I said, black was a metaphor.
Exactly. And this is what people have to realize. So, another good thing, you have a Harvard professor, Dr. Barry Fell, in which that he speaks about the Micmac, of the northern Algonquin, the family of tribes in which that the Micmac belonged to. And he said that they spoke the language of Liberian. Libyan. Now, where's Libya at? That is next to Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
That's in Africa.
Yeah.
What the hell is Micmac natives doing speaking damn African? And the crazy thing is that they preserved it over 1,000 years. Now, this is from a Harvard professor who studied language.
He said Libya.
Libya.
Right.
Is there Libya on this side as well?
Of course it is.
Mm-hmm.
But you look at the exotic map, so you never know what Libya he's talking about.
Well, in this particular case, they're claiming African.
Yeah. But this is Africa.
Right. This is Northwest Africa. So regardless of which one we want to say it, we know that it's something relating to us. That's what we can say. Whether it's in Libya there in Africa, if it's Libya here, you know what I'm saying? It's talking about us in some shape, form, or fashion. And this is coming from a Harvard professor who stated that Micmac, a damn Algonquin tribe, speaks African. Libyan, which is actually, when you look at it, it looks like hieroglyphics. It looks like the Mayan language. It looks like the Egyptian language or the hieroglyphics. That's how it looks.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like Egyptian. In fact, it is many of the meanings are identical.
Mm-hmm. The Maghrib al-Aqsa.
Africans and the Discovery of America by David Leo Weiner. He writes, when Columbus wanted to address the kings of the West Indies, he sent interpreters who spoke Hebrew, Arabic, and Chaldean.
Mm.
What the hell?
Mm.
West Indians speaking Hebrew, Arabic, and Chaldean, y'all. What's up with that?
Who's doing speaking them languages?
Exactly. Because Hebrew, will tell you what, that comes from out of the Semitic line, and Arabic comes from the Hamitic line, and Chaldean comes from the Semitic Hamitic line from out of Mesopotamia, and all of that was on the other side of the Tigris Euphrates River, and it was there amongst the but they were speaking that shit all the way here in the West Indies.
Mm-hmm.
That means in the Caribbean. That means in Puerto Rico. That means in Tobago. That means in Trinidad. That means in Bahamas. That means in Jamaica. That means in Cuba. They spoke what? Hebrew, Arabic, Chaldean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's supposed to be in Arabia, brother.
Yeah, brother.
On a serious note, to the extent that black relationships have survived as they have, what say you about that 400 years later?
It is amazing that black relationships have lasted for 400 years. They lasted this morning. They're also going to last tonight, and you may not even know the person to whom you're going to have the relationship with. But they do tend to go over. Relationships do go over like that. And as we move into what has happened to this, I know that our relationships sometimes really reach a low ebb. That's one of the reasons why we wrote the book, How to Find and Keep a BMW, a Black Man Working. That was spelled out in there. This is very serious. Because our relationships didn't start yesterday or last week. It also started 400 years ago when those 19 persons were here. And I want you to remember something very important that one of our by any means necessary power brokers told us, and that was Malcolm X. He said, if we can only remember that you didn't land at Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on you. And it's very essential that we kind of keep this in place. And knowing that these are the things that happen, then we have to move more to change it. See, we have a system that would not like to see black males and black females together. They would not like to see that happening at all. Because once we come together, they understand the power of the strength of the black woman, the queen of the universe. They know that, her strength. They also know the power of the black male, the warrior. If you would turn him loose, he will protect also his family and things that need to be done. And because they understand that if our relationships are together, then they will lose. But if our relationships are torn up, then we can forever be treated in certain ways by the oppressors. That's why they gave us something called integration, which is nothing but the illusion of inclusion. They gave us this. They actually gave their statement. And when they gave that statement, it meant that they could go right into your homes. They went into the black homes now, the powers that be, and told us that you cannot discipline your children anymore. And if you discipline your children, you were going to jail. It's this kind of thing they told us. Now, this is amazing that, you know, the black parents who in Africa, that was out of the question. Some social worker come in there saying you can't discipline your children, the social worker would disappear. As you all know, this kind of thing would go on. You would be sitting in a place like this, and all you had to do was act up and do something wrong, and all your mother had to do was to glance in your direction. Y'all remember that? And you remember that the glance meant, don't let me have to get up and come over there. And every once in a while in the black family, there was a fool who would challenge the glance. And if you could get home over the foot, over the ironing card, over whatever, you were sent to the backyard to get something off the peach tree. And if you brought something in that was too short, God forbid that you would do something like that. But then it got so terrible in frightening us. This is why we got to take this back. And this is the best part of our action plan, is to reclaim the minds of our children. Because then they went into the public schools and took discipline out of there. So when we acted up in there, they put our boys, our black men, into something called special ed classes. And as you know, those special ed classes are nothing but holding cells until they can go to the state prison. But this is what they did. And then, the one thing that they knew, that if we can put them in prison, if we can have them convicted for a felony, then once they get out of prison, they cannot get a job. Because of that, they cannot get the job. And then if they happen to eke out and find a job, then they have to pay taxes on a job, yet they cannot vote, and I call that taxation without representation. That's what we're looking at. And if one of the things that we would learn to do, they did a grand thing when they took that discipline away from us, because when they made our parents afraid to discipline the children, then what happened? We found out that the teachers were afraid of the principals were scared of the superintendent was scared of the school board was scared of the parents were scared of the children, and the children ain't scared of nobody. The last statement, the reason why we're so pleased to have the covenant, it makes all of this type foolishness stop. It's going on under Angela Glover in San Francisco. It's all over the country, and they're all saying we finally have a movement where we can take back over the minds of our children. And the first thing we got to take over, the covenant taught us that we do not have to have black leaders anymore. It told us because everyone in this room is empowered to be a black leader. Everyone in this room. Because see, right now, these people that you're calling black leaders are not what they used to be with Marcus Garvey's day. They're not what they used to be back in the days of W.E.B. Du Bois or Martin Luther King. Those were the people that got us together and planted a strategy, and we're not looking for fame. But today's black leaders, I'm afraid, have become leading blacks. And don't ever confuse leading blacks with black leaders. Let me tell you why you don't do that. One of the reasons you don't confuse them, black leaders are chosen by you. They're chosen by the people they're going to lead. They're chosen by us. But let me tell you about the leading blacks. The leading blacks are chosen by the media. Leading blacks are chosen by ABC, all broadcasting Caucasians.
Should I stop her or let her go?
Now this is the last one. Leading blacks are also chosen by NBC. Nothing broadcasting but Caucasians. And the rest are chosen by CBS, the Caucasian broadcasting system. And when you allow leaders to be chosen by the media that's owned by the corporations, when you get ready to change your lives, when you get ready to demonstrate, when you get ready to march, when you get ready to come to the covenant, when you get ready to endorse and make Tavis one of our next elected officials, but what happens? Then you must take the time to carefully watch and see what the leading blacks are doing, because that's when the leading blacks sneak into the door to the corporations, and they will tell the corporations, oh, we know how to go and put them down. We know how to get you some real affirmative action Negroes to come in here and work. We know how to do that. But at the end of the day, the leading blacks lead the corporations, and the leading blacks have gotten paid while we have gotten played.
by definition, a slave is a person that is disarmed.
For too long, African Americans have been on the wrong side of the gun. From the racial motivation of slavery, to the white supremacy movement, to today's escalating black-on-black crime. The politically correct view that a disarmed black community is a safe community is only safe for those who seek control.
The black community went from being disarmed, being mistreated, being enslaved because of a lack of access to guns, ultimately went through a period of saying, aha, we have the right to bear arms, we're going to make sure it's respected, to a period where now the gun is the main tool of maintenance of the narco economy, which is the only economy in the African American community.
400 years of injustice. 400 years of being on the wrong side of the gun. It's time for change.
Why is the gangbanger who has the Saturday night special in his pocket given more rights than the average everyday citizen? Even though he was illegally armed, he has a right to defend himself, and you have not the ability to defend yourself.
So if the law says that I can't buy a certain gun, that if I can't carry a gun a certain way, I abide by that because I'm law-abiding. But the criminals are the ones that carry, buy any type of guns that they want, and are empowered.
The basic right of every American is the right to self-defense. Take away that right, and the individual is powerless.
It's not unusual for America in its long history to disarm or seek to disarm undesirable populations.
Gun control laws have kept African Americans in their place for hundreds of years. From the earliest days of slavery up until the mid-1800s, blatantly written gun control laws prohibited slaves and freed slaves from owning firearms.
Be it further enacted that if any Negro shall presume to carry arms whatsoever, he shall be whipped with 21 lashes.
With the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1866, African Americans were given the right to bear arms. But new laws were written in such a way to exclude blacks from purchasing guns.
The greatest service the authorities can render the city now is to disarm every Negro, search every Negro house, and arrest everyone who is...
Inexpensive handguns were banned, or high taxes were imposed to keep guns out of the financial reach of a mostly poor black community.
There's been various statutes throughout every state that had sizable African American populations after slavery to restrict, through black codes, the ability for blacks to be armed.
In 1941, Florida Supreme Court Justice Buford declared the original 1893 Florida Gun Control Act was passed with the purpose of disarming Negro laborers. The statute was never intended to be applied to the white population. In the 1960s, when armed blacks took to the streets in the race riots in Los Angeles, Newark, and Chicago, the laws were once again rewritten. In a futile attempt to curb the violence, Congress passed the 1968 Gun Control Act. Public outcry for the restrictions of guns after the assassinations of Dr. Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy hid the true purpose of the legislation.
It was Robert Sherrill writing on the 1968 legislation who stated that it was really an attempt to restrict arms for black people.
Championed by Senator Thomas Dodd and signed into law by President Johnson, the 68 Gun Control Act used shrewdly crafted language to give the authorities control to dictate who could and who could not own a firearm and what types of firearms Americans can own.
Thomas Dodd from Connecticut, a Connecticut Yankee, goes to the Library of Congress and gets the actual gun act that the Nazis had passed in 1938, and he has it translated into English.
The '68 Gun Control Act was written and in some cases almost copied word for word from the same laws the Nazis used in 1938 to control undesirable populations in Hitler's Germany. Both documents categorize and restrict firearms to certain individuals. Both documents are based on racial fear.
And so they take this document and they use it to draft legislation to start requiring more licensing and more constriction of the right to keep and bear arms.
When I found out what the restrictions were, I was very surprised. Each town, each police chief has the discretion of whether to give a license or not. There is just not one set rule. It seems that a lot of black people, and especially young black men, are held to a higher standard. Maybe you have a drunk driving record, and that would be enough to disqualify you, where legally it's not. It's not a felony conviction. Whereas maybe somebody from the suburbs that's white and maybe from a more influential family would have the same exact record as you do, but would not be denied. It's kind of subtle discrimination.
It seems unthinkable today that legislation is still being written to keep minorities in their place, but it is. Purchasing a firearm requires the applicant to fill out a federal form to verify their race. Restrictive gun laws, gun bans, warrantless searches of public housing, and the confiscation of firearms in major cities continue to deprive minorities of their right to protect and defend themselves.
Violence is increasing. The number of gun-related deaths is increasing yearly. So it should be rather obvious that the gun laws are not working because things are not getting better. They're making more and more laws and it's getting worse.
Gun control has not worked. The federal government's own Centers for Disease Control can't show conclusive evidence that reducing guns reduces violence. Yet, these facts are dismissed. Historically, more guns in the hands of decent, law-abiding citizens has had the opposite effect. In 1964, the desegregation of Jonesboro, Louisiana High School was threatened by local authorities with fire hoses. 4 armed black men arrived with loaded shotguns. Without firing a shot, the mob dispersed and the authorities retreated. The students entered the school without incident. Those men were members of the Deacons for Defense, an armed citizens militia founded in Jonesboro, Louisiana. The Deacons were everyday citizens who by 1965 had organized into more than 50 chapters throughout the South in self-defense from the Ku Klux Klan.
In 1964, down in Louisiana, there were all types of demonstrations going on by freedom riders. Many times, the demonstrations would be met by armed white resistance. People were dying and being shot and intimidated because they were unarmed. And basically, because they were unarmed, they were also being denied the right to vote.
The Deacons protected civil rights workers for CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, who were registering voters in Louisiana and Mississippi. They patrolled black neighborhoods and protected black churches where CORE was holding voting rights seminars.
These were regular, everyday people. They were not some paramilitary group. The thing that made them different is they were veterans from the Korean War. They were veterans from World War II. And so they did have the training and they did have the discipline that came from being veterans. Once the Klansmen and the white citizen consular and the deputy sheriff that was wearing the sheet at night learned that these deacons for defense would shoot back, then they were not as readily willing to go and pounce upon them in the wee hours of the morning.
Are you going to do something about it?
Because now they knew that, well, the right to bear arms is providing constitutional rights for these blacks, irrespective of the fact that we want to take away their civil rights. They're fighting on solid ground.
The effectiveness of the deacons in deterring violence was so great that Dr. Martin Luther King and Floyd McKissick of CORE hired the deacons to protect the marchers from Klan aggression in the 1966 March Against Fear.
The very effect of armed resistance in the name of civil rights is what really casts a new enthusiasm into the civil rights movement at a critical time. When the right to bear arms is put in the proper perspective historically, then people will see that the African American community having guns to protect themselves, not from crooked cops and police brutality, but from the culture of drugs and gangs because of a war going on due to the narco economy. And so until we address why are these people armed, why are they shooting, we're not going to be able to create an oasis of redevelopment in the inner cities of America.
Inner city violence is directly related to the black market for illegal drugs, gangs, and drug dealers' turf wars. Today's war on drugs, like alcohol prohibition in the 1920s, share many similarities. Back then, gangsters and bootleggers took to the streets to protect their territories. Homicide rates skyrocketed at the beginning of Prohibition, then took a huge drop after its repeal. Homicide rates again spiked in the early 1970s when President Nixon declared America's war on drugs. More than 35 years later, homicide rates in America's inner cities fluctuate but continue to peak.
We've got to stop the demonization of guns. We've got to encourage law-abiding citizens to arm themselves. And then we have to circulate that information throughout the high crime areas.
Government published facts speak volumes on the effectiveness of armed citizens. According to the U.S. Bureau of Justice Statistics, 57% of polled felons agree criminals are more worried about meeting an armed victim than they are about running into the police. And, according to the U.S. Department of Justice, the probability of serious injury to women during an attack is 2.5 times greater when they are unarmed.
If women were able to freely carry firearms, there would be less chance of somebody looking at them as a victim. There would be less crime committed against women because a criminal would have to question, is this woman armed?
And, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, 550 rapes and 1,100 murders are prevented every day just by showing a gun.
We got to tell the other side of the story about the hundreds of thousands of times in America where guns are used to stop violence and to stop a crime from being committed.
The police aren't there to protect us. They are there to enforce laws and to arrest criminals once they are criminals, once they have committed a crime. But they're not our personal bodyguards, so I have to do that for myself. No matter how many gun control laws they put into effect, no matter how much they try to restrict it, even if they make it illegal for anybody to own guns, there's going to be a black market.
The community does not get safer when the criminals are told there's no guns available on the part of law-abiding citizens.
People are going to have access to firearms, and the ones that are going to have them are going to be the criminals.
That's like an open season for crime.
It's just like drugs are illegal, and it's a booming business.
History has a habit of repeating itself. Now, as it was back then, politicians and community leaders wrongly claim less guns means less violence. Now, as it was back then, politicians and community leaders wrongly misguide the public in believing that the police and not the community can best provide protection, even though the Supreme Court has publicly stated that state and local governments do not have an obligation to protect citizens from criminal harm.
Guns are a convenient target that disingenuous civil rights leaders and politicians hide behind because they don't want to address the real problem, which is why are all the black youth dropping out of high school and getting guns.
Gun control advocate Sarah Brady, wife of James Brady, whose name is on the 1993 Brady Bill Violence Protection Act, purchased her own son a high-powered rifle.
I think they're misguided, and I think it's a hot issue.
We can always get a bunch of politicians, well, here's the mayor, here's the alderman, here's the state rep, here's the state, well, here's the president of the Senate. They'll always come out to a press conference where they can put on a shirt and a tie and insinuate that they're there to protect the children. It resonates with voters. It's something that's unquestionable in terms of its merit, and it's something that's patently wrong in terms of the gun control issue, because gun control does not protect the children.
Fact is, a child up to the age of 14 is 4 times more likely to drown, 4 times more likely to die in a fire, and 13 times more likely to die in an auto collision than from a firearm accident.
And that's a message that has to be driven home. What we've got to do is create a solidarity for gun owners that are across the political spectrum, across the racial spectrum. I think that it's high time that blacks, whites, all Americans of goodwill realize that the sacred right to self-defense is at risk in America during the next 4 years in an Obama administration, with Eric Holder going in as Attorney General. Why? Not because they're bad people, but because their philosophy is such that drying up the availability of guns will create greater safety. So I think that what we're looking for is not to be found with gun control, but can only be found when citizens take it upon themselves to protect themselves and their property.
For too long, community leaders, ministers, and politicians have failed to reject the gun control lies. For too long, African Americans have lost control of our neighborhoods. For too long, African Americans have been denied the right to keep and bear arms. For too long, African Americans have been victims of criminals, drug dealers, and dangerous gun control policy. For too long, African Americans have been on the wrong side of the gun.
We have to remain vigilant. We have to challenge the Congress when they try to bring about these new gun control laws, and we have to educate the African American community and other communities in America the racist roots of what gun control is really all about.
Spirituality is a way of accepting the fact that there is a spiritual force in the universe larger than all of mankind. But someone had to come along and invent a word called God. And someone had to say of another God and say, mine is better than yours. And someone had to create faith. Someone said, I have the true faith. Religion is the organization of spirituality into something that became the handmaiden of conquerors. Nearly all religions were brought to people and imposed on people by conquerors and used as the framework to control their minds. My main point here is that if you are the child of God and God is a part of you, then in your imagination, God's supposed to look like you. And when you accept a picture of the deity assigned to you by another people, you become the spiritual prisoners of that other people.
The representation of God should always be the great. It should always be the black, because it can produce all things. The representation of God should always be the great. It should always be the black, because it can produce all things. The representation of God should always be the great. It should always be the black, because it can produce all things. The representation of God should always be the great. It should always be the black.
Are referred to as researchers. The word is R-E, researchers. Why? It's because I'm not doing anything new. Myself and others like me who are referred to as writers, authors, and researchers are merely researching, meaning other people have done the searching, other people have dug out the facts, and many centuries ago, maybe many thousands of years ago. And so this is what happens in a court. If you're going to make a decision in a court, you have to do some research. Go back into the records and see what the courts before you have said. See what the judges have said 30 years ago about this particular subject. So what you're doing is you're researching. Do it again. And so today, the way young people need to understand is that there's knowledge out there that you haven't been given. And you need to research that knowledge. And the way it's done is very simply, you don't confront authority. Just go to the library, especially today with the technology that exists on the web. All you have to do is go on the web and start researching words and terms and symbols and how government works. Where do religions come from? Where do the religious ideas that we espouse and the things that we talk about in Christianity and Judaism and Islam, where do these ideas even come from? How did these great religious movements get started? And where does the money come from? And what is the connection between religion and governments today? It's very interesting when you start looking at the oil companies. For many years, oil companies, most people don't know this because they don't study it, but oil companies have been financing churches, Protestant and Catholic churches, especially Protestant churches, have been getting a lot of money from oil corporations for their missionary movements. A lot of the big churches have huge missionary movements financed by the oil companies. There was a large book, a very thick book, written many years ago that you might be able to find in the library called Thy Will Be Done. And it had about 6 different authors, but the book is called Thy Will Be Done. And it's a very thick book, documented every page about how the oil companies are financing churches for their missionary movements, sending missionaries out to different countries to prepare them for Christianity and for the Lord, and then when the people are now acclimated to the new Christian environment in their country, now quietly the oil companies can come in, now they can send in the CIA and all of these secret societies and government. They can begin to come into the country and set up the apparatus for the oil companies, for the corporations. But they needed to get the people's approval first, so we send in the Christian missionaries. Go read the book, Thy Will Be Done. But I was again suggesting that what we want to do is to educate the young people and educate people generally a little by little by little. It's very difficult to spring new ideas on people. But as it was proven in China with the young people who were spreading the concept of freedom and liberty and dignity on tapes throughout China, which caused the Tiananmen Revolution, I suggest the same thing might want to be done now. Young people ought to begin to talk to each other, begin to
the more you begin to investigate what we think we understand, where we came from, what we think we're doing, the more you begin to see we've been lied to. We've been lied to by every institution. What makes you think for 1 minute that the religious institution is the only one that's never been touched? The religious institutions of this world are at the bottom of the dirt. The religious institutions in this world are put there by the same people who gave you your government, your corrupt education, to set up your international banking cartels. We have been misled away from the true and divine presence in the universe that men have called God. I don't know what God is, but I know what He isn't. And unless and until you are prepared to look at the whole truth, and wherever it may go, whoever it may lead to, the more you educate yourself, the more you understand where things come from, the more obvious things become, and you begin to see lies everywhere. You have to know the truth and seek the truth, and the truth will set you free.
Because I gotta tell you the truth, folks. I gotta tell you the truth. When it comes to bullshit, big time, major league bullshit, you have to stand in awe of the all-time champion of false promises and exaggerated claims, religion. Think about it. Religion has actually convinced people that there's an invisible man living in the sky who watches everything you do every minute of every day. And the invisible man has a special list of 10 things he does not want you to do. And if you do any of these 10 things, he has a special place full of fire and smoke and burning and torture and anguish where he will send you to live and suffer and burn and choke and scream and cry forever and ever till the end of time. But he loves you. He loves you and he needs money. He always needs money. He's all powerful, all perfect, all knowing, and all wise. Somehow just can't handle money. Religion takes in billions of dollars. They pay no taxes, and they always need a little more. Now, you talk about a good bullshit story. Holy shit.
This is the sun. As far back as 10,000 BC, history is abundant with carvings and writings reflecting people's respect and adoration for this object. And it is simple to understand why, as every morning the sun would rise, bringing vision, warmth, and security, saving man from the cold, blind, predator-filled darkness of night. Without it, the cultures understood, the crops would not grow, and life on the planet would not survive. These realities made the sun the most adored object of all time. Likewise, they were also very aware of the stars. The tracking of the stars allowed them to recognize and anticipate events which occurred over long periods of time, such as eclipses and full moons. They in turn cataloged celestial groups into what we know today as constellations. This is the cross of the zodiac, one of the oldest conceptual images in human history. It reflects the sun as it figuratively passes through the 12 major constellations over the course of a year. It also reflects the 12 months of the year, the 4 seasons, and the solstices and equinoxes. The term zodiac relates to the fact that constellations were anthropomorphized, or personified, as figures or animals. In other words, the early civilizations did not just follow the sun and stars, they personified them with elaborate myths involving their movements and relationships. The sun, with its life-giving and saving qualities, was personified as a representative of the unseen creator or God, God's Son, the light of the world, the savior of humankind. Likewise, the 12 constellations represented places of travel for God's Son, and were identified by names, usually representing elements of nature that happened during that period of time. For example, Aquarius, the water bearer, who brings the spring rains. This is Horus. He is the sun god of Egypt of around 3000 BC. He is the sun anthropomorphized, and his life is a series of allegorical myths involving the sun's movement in the sky. From the ancient hieroglyphics in Egypt, we know much about this solar messiah. For instance, Horus, being the sun or the light, had an enemy known as Set, and Set was the personification of the darkness or night. And, metaphorically speaking, every morning Horus would win the battle against Set, while in the evening Set would conquer Horus and send him into the underworld. It is important to note that dark versus light, or good versus evil, is one of the most ubiquitous mythological dualities ever known, and is still expressed on many levels to this day. Broadly speaking, the story of Horus is as follows. Horus was born on December 25th of the Virgin Isis Mary. His birth was accompanied by a star in the east, and upon his birth he was adored by 3 kings. At the age of 12, he was a prodigal child teacher, and at the age of 30, he was baptized by a figure known as Anup, and thus began his ministry. Horus had 12 disciples he traveled about with, performing miracles such as healing the sick and walking on water. Horus was known by many gestural names such as the Truth, the Light, God's Anointed Son, the Good Shepherd, the Lamb of God, and many others. After being betrayed by Typhon, Horus was crucified, buried for 3 days, and thus resurrected. These attributes of Horus, whether original or not, seem to permeate many cultures of the world, for many other gods are found to have the same general mythological structure. Attis of Phrygia, born of the Virgin Nana on December 25th, crucified, placed in a tomb, and after 3 days was resurrected. Krishna of India, born of the Virgin Devaki, with a star in the east signaling his coming. He performed miracles with his disciples, and, upon his death, was resurrected. Dionysus of Greece, born of a virgin on December 25th, was a traveling teacher who performed miracles such as turning water into wine. He was referred to as the King of Kings, God's only begotten Son, the Alpha and Omega, and many others. And, upon his death, he was resurrected. Mithra of Persia, born of a virgin on December 25th, he had 12 disciples and performed miracles, and upon his death was buried for 3 days and thus resurrected. He was also referred to as the Truth, the Light, and many others. Interestingly, the sacred day of worship of Mithra was Sunday. The fact of the matter is, there are numerous saviors from different periods from all over the world which subscribe to these general characteristics. The question remains, why these attributes? Why the virgin birth on December 25th? Why dead for 3 days in the inevitable resurrection? Why 12 disciples or followers? To find out, let's examine the most recent of the solar messiahs. Jesus Christ was born of the Virgin Mary on December 25th in Bethlehem. His birth was announced by a star in the east, which 3 kings or magi followed to locate and adorn the new Savior. He was a child teacher at 12, and at the age of 30 he was baptized by John the Baptist, and thus began his ministry. Jesus had 12 disciples, which he traveled about with, performing miracles such as healing the sick, walking on water, raising the dead. He was also known as the King of Kings, the Son of God, the Light of the World, the Alpha and Omega, the Lamb of God, and many, many others. After being betrayed by his disciple Judas and sold for 30 pieces of silver, he was crucified, placed in a tomb, and after 3 days was resurrected and ascended into heaven. First of all, the birth sequence is completely astrological. The star in the east is Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, which, on December 24th, aligns with the 3 brightest stars in Orion's belt. These 3 bright stars in Orion's belt are called today what they were called in ancient times, the 3 kings. And the 3 kings and the brightest star, Sirius, all point to the place of the sunrise on December 25th. This is why the 3 kings follow the star in the east, in order to locate the sunrise, the birth of the sun. The Virgin Mary is the constellation Virgo, also known as Virgo the Virgin. Virgo in Latin means virgin. Virgo is also referred to as the house of bread, and the representation of Virgo is a virgin holding a sheaf of wheat. This house of bread and its symbol of wheat represents August and September, the time of harvest. In turn, Bethlehem, in fact, literally translates to house of bread. Bethlehem is thus a reference to the constellation Virgo, a place in the sky, not on earth. There's another very interesting phenomenon that occurs around December 25th, or the winter solstice. From the summer solstice to the winter solstice, the days become shorter and colder. And from the perspective of the northern hemisphere, the sun appears to move south and get smaller and more scarce. The shortening of the days and the expiration of the crops when approaching the winter solstice symbolize the process of death to the ancients. It was the death of the sun. And by December 22nd, the sun's demise was fully realized, for the sun, having moved south continually for 6 months, makes it to its lowest point in the sky. Here a curious thing occurs. The sun stops moving south, at least perceivably, for 3 days. And during this 3-day pause, the sun resides in the vicinity of the Southern Cross, or Crux, constellation. And after this time, on December 25th, the sun moves 1 degree, this time north, foreshadowing longer days, warmth, and spring. And thus it was said, the sun died on the cross, was dead for 3 days, only to be resurrected or born again. This is why Jesus and numerous other sun gods share the crucifixion, 3-day death, and resurrection concept. It is the sun's transition period before it shifts its direction back into the northern hemisphere, bringing spring and thus salvation. However, they did not celebrate the resurrection of the sun until the spring equinox, or Easter. This is because at the spring equinox the sun officially overpowers the evil darkness, as daytime thereafter becomes longer in duration than the night, and the revitalizing conditions of spring emerge. Now, probably the most obvious of all the astrological symbolism around Jesus regards the 12 disciples. They are simply the 12 constellations of the zodiac, which Jesus, being the sun, travels about with. In fact, the number 12 is replete throughout the Bible. Coming back to the cross of the zodiac, the figurative life of the sun, this was not just an artistic expression or tool to track the sun's movement. It was also a pagan spiritual symbol, the shorthand of which looked like this. This is not a symbol of Christianity. It is a pagan adaptation of the cross of the zodiac. This is why Jesus in early occult art is always shown with his head on the cross, for Jesus is the Son of God, the light of the world, the risen Savior who will come again, as it does every morning, the glory of God who defends against the works of darkness as he is born again every morning and can be seen coming in the clouds up in heaven with his crown of thorns or sun rays. Now, of the many astronomical metaphors in the Bible, one of the most important has to do with the ages. Throughout the scriptures, there are numerous references to the age. In order to understand this, we need to be familiar with a phenomenon known as the precession of the equinoxes. The ancient Egyptians, along with cultures long before them, recognized that approximately every 2150 years, the sunrise on the morning of the spring equinox would occur in a different sign of the zodiac. This has to do with a slow, angular wobble that the Earth maintains as it rotates on its axis. It is called a precession because the constellations go backwards rather than through the normal yearly cycle. The amount of time it takes for the precession to go through all 12 signs is roughly 25,765 years. This is also called the Great Year, and ancient societies were very aware of this, and they referred to each 2150-year period as an age. From 4300 BC to 2150 BC, it was the age of Taurus, the bull. From 2150 BC to 1 AD, it was the age of Aries, the ram. And from 1 AD to 2150 AD, it is the age of Pisces, the age we are still in to this day. And in and around 2150, we will enter the new age, the age of Aquarius. Now, the Bible reflects, broadly speaking, a symbolic movement through 3 ages while foreshadowing a 4th. In the Old Testament, when Moses comes down Mount Sinai with the 10 Commandments, he is very upset to see his people worshiping a golden bull calf. In fact, he shattered the stone tablets and instructed his people to kill each other in order to purify themselves. Most biblical scholars will attribute this anger to the fact that the Israelites were worshiping a false idol or something to that effect. The reality is, the golden bull is Taurus the bull, and Moses represents the new age of Aries the ram. This is why Jews even today still blow the ram's horn. Moses represents the new age of Aries, and upon the new age, everyone must shed the old age. Other deities mark these transitions as well, such as Mithra, a pre-Christian god who kills the bull in the same symbology. Now Jesus is the figure who ushers in the age following Aries, the age of Pisces, or the 2 fish. Fish symbolism is very abundant in the New Testament. Jesus feeds 5,000 people with bread and 2 fish. When he begins his ministry walking along Galilee, he befriends 2 fishermen who follow him. And I think we have all seen the Jesus fish on the back of people's cars. Little do they know what it actually means. It is a pagan astrological symbolism for the sun's kingdom during the age of Pisces. Also, Jesus' assumed birth date is essentially the start of this age. At Luke 22:10, when Jesus is asked by his disciples where the last Passover would be, Jesus replies, "Behold, when ye are entered into the city, there shall a man meet you, bearing a pitcher of water. Follow him into the house where he entereth in." This scripture is by far one of the most revealing of all the astrological references. The man bearing the pitcher of water is Aquarius, the water bearer, who is always pictured as a man pouring out a pitcher of water. He represents the age after Pisces, and when the sun, God's Son, leaves the age of Pisces, Jesus, it will go into the house of Aquarius, as Aquarius follows Pisces in the precession of the equinoxes. All Jesus is saying is that after the age of Pisces will come the age of Aquarius. Now, we have all heard about the end times and the end of the world. The cartoonish depictions in the book of Revelation aside, a main source of this idea comes from Matthew 28:20, where Jesus says, "I will be with you even to the end of the world." However, in the King James Version, world is a mistranslation, among many mistranslations. The actual word being used is eon, which means age. I will be with you even to the end of the age, which is true, as Jesus' solar Piscean personification will end when the sun enters the age of Aquarius. The entire concept of end times and the end of the world is a misinterpreted astrological allegory. Let's tell that to the approximately 100 million people in America who believe the end of the world is coming. Furthermore, the character of Jesus being a literary and astrological hybrid is most explicitly a plagiarization of the Egyptian sun god Horus. For example, inscribed about 3,500 years ago on the walls at the Temple of Luxor in Egypt are images of the Annunciation, the miracle conception, the birth, and the adoration of Horus. The images begin with Thoth announcing to the Virgin Isis that she will conceive Horus, then Neph, the Holy Ghost, impregnating the Virgin, and then the virgin birth and the adoration. This is exactly the story of Jesus' miracle conception. In fact, the literary similarities between the Egyptian religion and the Christian religion are staggering. And the plagiarism is continuous. The story of Noah and Noah's Ark is taken directly from tradition. The concept of the Great Flood is ubiquitous throughout the ancient world, with over 200 cited claims in different periods and times. However, one need look no further for a pre-Christian source than the Epic of Gilgamesh, written in 2600 BC. This story talks of a great flood commanded by God, an ark with saved animals upon it, and even the release and return of a dove, all held in common with the biblical story, among many other similarities. And then there is the plagiarized story of Moses. Upon Moses' birth, it is said that he was placed in a reed basket and set adrift in a river in order to avoid infanticide. He was later rescued by a daughter of royalty and raised by her as a prince. This baby in a basket story was lifted directly from the myth of Sargon of Akkad of around 2250 BC. Sargon was born, placed in a reed basket in order to avoid infanticide, and set adrift in a river. He was in turn rescued and raised by Aki, a royal midwife. Furthermore, Moses is known as the lawgiver, the giver of the Ten Commandments, the Mosaic Law. However, the idea of a law being passed from God to a prophet up on a mountain is also a very old motif. Moses is just another lawgiver in a long line of lawgivers in mythological history. In India, Manu was the great lawgiver. In Crete, Minos ascended Mount Dicta, where Zeus gave him the sacred laws, while in Egypt there was Meses, who carried stone tablets and upon them the laws of God were written. Manu, Minos, Meses, Moses. And as far as the Ten Commandments, they are taken outright from spell 125 in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. What the Book of the Dead phrased, "I have not stolen," became "Thou shalt not steal." "I have not killed," became "Thou shalt not kill." "I have not told lies," became "Thou shalt not bear false witness," and so forth. In fact, the Egyptian religion is likely the primary foundational basis for the Judeo-Christian theology. Baptism, afterlife, final judgment, virgin birth, death and resurrection, crucifixion, the Ark of the Covenant, circumcision, saviors, Holy Communion, Great Flood, Easter, Christmas, Passover, and many, many more are all attributes of Egyptian ideas long predating Christianity and Judaism. Justin Martyr, one of the first Christian historians and defenders, wrote, "When we say that he, Jesus Christ, our teacher, was produced without sexual union, was crucified and died and rose again and ascended into heaven, we propound nothing different from what you believe regarding those who you esteem sons of Jupiter." In a different writing, Justin Martyr said, "He was born of a virgin, except this in common with what you believe of Perseus." It's obvious that Justin and other early Christians knew how similar Christianity was to the pagan religions. However, Justin had a solution. As far as he was concerned, the devil did it. The devil had the foresight to come before Christ and create his characteristics in the pagan world.
Fundamentalist Christianity, fascinating.